The Beverly Liggett case, madness by inheritance, when a favorite son becomes an executioner. Genetics, unfortunately, is inextricably linked to many diseases that are inherited. These include some mental disorders. However, even an existing predisposition is only a risk in probability, but not a guarantee that the child will inherit this or that ailment. Naturally, every parent hopes that the children will take from him only the best, and diseases will bypass offspring. Many experts say that there are no specific genes for the transmission of mental illness. That is, no one gene is necessary or sufficient to provoke the disease. Nevertheless, mental illness tends to run in families. This is exactly the problem faced by our heroine today, Beverly Liggett, who sincerely believed that her children would not be affected by such an affliction. And indeed, Beverly's daughter grew up a perfectly healthy and balanced woman, but the son, apparently, took a double blow in which he blamed solely on his mother. It should be noted that the presence of a mental disorder did not affect the intelligence of this guy. On the contrary, he was very clever and calculating, from which the atrocities committed by him look even more sickeningly creepy. Who is Beverly Liggett? Beverly Liggett was born on the 1st of October 1956 in the capital of Colorado, a picturesque metropolis called Denver. She was raised with her older brother Stephen and sister Martha in an ordinary family of Barbara and Edwin Liggett, who lived all their lives in their hometown, almost never leaving its boundaries. After graduating from high school, Beverly went to a local college, but here she could not go to university for a variety of reasons, partly related to her health. In her youth, the girl worked as a salesman, but after she married at the age of 26 and gave birth to 2 children, she devoted herself to her family for many years and was exclusively engaged in raising heirs and creating a home. In 1988, Beverly had a long-awaited firstborn son, Ari, and a few years later, a daughter, Libby, was born. The young woman literally did not care about her heirs and lived for them. However, in the second half of the 90s, her marriage broke up. The husband left the family, moved to another state, and was no longer interested in the fate of his ex-wife and did not take any part in the lives of children. Beverly was forced to take 2 jobs at once, but thanks to her diligence and determination, the family of 3 did not need anything. She and her children moved to the suburbs of Denver, a small and relatively young, founded in 2001 town centennial, where they rented a cozy, spacious house. In the mid-2000s, Beverly, on one of the dating sites, met a man named Seth Missy, with whom they had a correspondence, which grew into a romantic relationship. It was he who inspired her lover to finally fulfill her dream and pursue higher education. Liggett chose medical school because she always dreamed of helping other people and felt that in this lies her calling. At that time, she was already over 50 years old, and in the group she was twice as old as her fellow students. However, she easily found a common language with them and is remembered by all as sociable, attentive, and responsible miniature brunette, who was nicknamed Caring Angel. Beverly and Seth's romance lasted about 5 years before the couple decided to officially legalize their relationship. For both of them, the step was a serious one, but they were ready for it. Beverly was happy, as she finally had a college degree, had a better paying job, and was about to marry the man she loved. Her children were old enough by then to be on their own, but her son Ari was a source of genuine anxiety and apprehension, and there were a number of good reasons for that. A hereditary disease. There was a sensitive issue in the Liggett family that they tried hard to hide from others and never discussed with outsiders. The fact that Beverly and her sister Martha from an early age suffered from bipolar affective disorder, which is characterized by frequent changes in mood phases, from manic to depressive. From time to time, the disorder was exacerbated. But if Martha experienced minor discomfort associated with this disorder, and the prescribed medication quickly gave positive results, Beverly sometimes needed hospital treatment because she was on the verge of voluntarily taking her own life. It was for this reason that she was unable to go to university in her time, and for the same reason the marriage with the father of her children broke up. It is also worth noting that her mother, Barbara too, was subject to prolonged depression, but she faced this problem in the 40s, and then the woman no one in time did not provide qualified help, and so she was forced to fight her illness on her own for almost all her life. Beverly was sure that the mental disorder in their family is transmitted exclusively through the female line because the disease manifested itself in her mother, her and her sister, while her brother Stephen remained completely normal. In this regard, Beverly feared for the health of her daughter Libby, but just the daughter of the disease bypassed, hitting with redoubled force on Ari, the special child. From early childhood, Ari was a rather strange, withdrawn boy prone to tantrums. At the age of 5, he was diagnosed with autism, and later a whole host of other mental disorders and abnormalities were added. He could withdraw into himself, and completely abstracted from what was going on around him. But such states, as a rule, alternated with attacks of aggression. Despite his mental problems, Ari went to a normal high school, where he studied quite well. Particularly easy to give him the exact sciences. In particular, he was fond of chemistry and physics. The boy easily solved complex problems, and most calculations were made in his mind. His intelligence was above average, but his social and communication skills were practically absent. Classmates avoided the strange and unsociable peer, or simply mocked him. Ari had no friends at all, was not eager to learn about the world around him, was aggressive and violent, which manifested itself in cruelty to animals and attacks on other children. The boy was repeatedly hospitalized and prescribed medication to correct his condition, but at home he usually stopped taking the prescribed medication and soon returned to his previous state. His parents tried to control him to take the necessary pills, but the older he got, the more difficult it was to do so. He did not know how to ask or talk calmly, and he always got what he wanted with tantrums. The boy could shut himself in and not talk to anyone for weeks, but could talk for hours to himself or to some imaginary interlocutor. In periods of aggravation, he became dangerous to others, and his relatives sometimes insisted on his compulsory hospitalization. A dangerous teenager. As a teenager, Ari learned that his mother, aunt, and grandmother also suffered from mental health problems, and his mother had to be hospitalized at times. During that period, Ari literally hated his mother and blamed her for all of his troubles. He believed that she had awarded him with a disease that was ruining his life. The young man became increasingly uncontrollable. He threatened his loved ones with violence and constantly wondered why his own sister, family curse, bypassed. Being with him under the same roof was becoming unsafe, and the first could not stand the head of the family. He filed for divorce and literally escaped. Despite his diagnosis, Ari was easily able to enter the university, receiving a high passing score. However, the guy was expelled in his first year after he brought a homemade firearm to the institution and threatened a fellow student with death. At that time, he was arrested for the first time, but only got off with an educational talk, confiscation of the weapon, and expulsion from the university. About a year later, the police were contacted by Beverly and asked to come to their home immediately to subdue her son, who was threatening to kill her and her daughter, and appeared to be very serious. But the police handed the violent young man into the hands of psychiatrists, and those, after a short treatment in the hospital, released him home, prescribing medication, which Ari, of course, did not take. Hateful stepfather. Ari was 18 years old when Beverly met Seth and began dating him. Soon the couple decided to live together, but Ari, from the very beginning, took his mother's new chosen one in the bayonet. He tried in every possible way to get him out of the house, threatened, scandalized, and even started fights. The appearance of another man in the house young man perceived as a personal insult and betrayal by his mother. Seth, as best he could, tried to support his beloved. He looked for specialists who could help the young man, paid for his treatment in clinics, but the more he tried, the more Ari hated him. The very thought of this man becoming his stepfather and part of their family frightened and depressed Ari, making him aggressive and dangerous. Seth Missy repeatedly told his wife that her son was old enough to live on his own. He could study or work and be like everyone else if he took his medication properly. Beverly Liggett herself was well aware of this, but she loved her son and could not leave him or kick him out, so she continued to endanger her own life. Obsession with guns. As time went on, the young man's hobbies became more and more bizarre, sophisticated, and dangerous. He had a weakness for weapons, and to be more precise, was literally obsessed with them. In the basement of his own house, he collected homemade firearms literally from improvised materials, as they say, on his knees, which once again proved that the guy was very smart, clever, and enterprising. But Ari was not limited to one weapon and got the idea to create an explosive device. He found all the information he was interested in on the internet, bought or ordered the components he needed, and the substances he couldn't get. He decided to synthesize at home himself, using his deep knowledge of chemistry. The mother found her son in the backyard of the house. Beverly was suspicious, and since her son did not answer questions and behaved strangely, she immediately called the police. As it turned out, she did it in time because during the search, the police found in the house almost ready bomb. In addition, they found and confiscated a modified rifle, several pistols assembled from parts of different models, a silencer, and a lot of spare parts for weapons. When Ari's computer search history for the past few months was reviewed and studied, the FBI became seriously interested in the young man as they suspected that he was preparing a large-scale crime. In addition, in Ari's room on the shelves were numerous jars of poisonous substances, including arsenic and potassium cyanide. He himself could not clearly explain why he had purchased them. The young man was arrested the same day, but was only charged with a misdemeanor possession of weapons and careless handling of dangerous chemicals that could cause death or serious injury. But Ari pleaded guilty, cooperated with the investigation, and received only a 1-year suspended sentence, after which he returned to his home, where he again began to terrorize his mother, sister, and Seth. The threat of reprisals and the indifference of the medical profession. After his arrest and suspended sentence, Ari literally went mad with anger and hatred. Not a day went by that he didn't threaten to kill his family in their sleep or burn down their house after locking everyone in there. Then Ari was hospitalized again and spent about 3 months in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. Doctors, in addition to earlier diagnoses, revealed signs of schizophrenia and acute psychosis in the young man. After another course of treatment, the young man became quiet for a while and went into himself again. He did not talk to anyone, spent most of his time in his room at his computer, and seemed to take his prescribed medication faithfully. But only a month later, he had another breakdown, which was triggered by the news of his mother and Seth's upcoming wedding. Ari also overheard Ari talking about his mother and stepfather, planning to buy their own house in another state, move there, and start their lives over. Libby's sister had already moved out with her boyfriend, which meant Ari would be on his own. The 25-year-old guy was not happy about it. The young man literally went crazy. He threw his mother a tantrum, screamed, waved a knife in front of her, threatened to kill her and make sure that the body would never be found. Beverly immediately called the psychiatric hospital, told them everything, and asked for her son to be forcibly hospitalized again. But the attending physician was dismissive of her request, believing that there was no reason to do so, and that the last course of treatment had yielded positive results, so that Ari, in his opinion, did not pose a threat to others. That same evening, Beverly had one last conversation with Seth, who was in another city for work, and was unable to come to her immediately. Beverly's mysterious disappearance. On the 14th of October 2012, less than 2 weeks after the woman celebrated her 56th birthday, she mysteriously disappeared. She failed to turn up for hospital duty that day, something that had never happened before. Colleagues were the first to sound the alarm. After failing to call his lover and receiving no response to his numerous messages, Seth dialed Libby's number to find out when she had last spoken to her mother. As it turned out, Libby had also been trying to call her unsuccessfully since morning. Seth called the house phone, and what he heard horrified him. The phone was picked up by Ari, who unsuccessfully tried to copy his mother's voice, pretending to be her and claiming that she was fine. Seth immediately contacted the police and asked them to send a unit to their home as soon as possible. However, when the police arrived, they found that no one was home, and they could not find a good reason to break in at that time. Therefore, the only attempts made that day were to trace Beverly's phone signal and check her bank card activity. Since Beverly's car was also missing, it was put on a statewide manhunt, and it was the vehicle that led to a lead just 2 days later, when a patrolman spotted it in a Denver suburb and decided to check the paperwork and see if it was the right car. A creepy find in the boot. The car seemed strange to the police officer even before he checked the license plate number and made sure it belonged to the missing woman. When the last doubts were gone, the police officer approached the driver and asked for identification. The driver was a young man with long hair that partially covered his face. He was visibly nervous, and when he was asked to show his documents again, he simply pushed the throttle to the floor, sped off, and sped down the road at full speed. The police officer began to chase the fugitive and radioed for backup. But just a couple of minutes later, while trying to make a sharp turn at high speed, the car skidded, went off the road, and hit a tree. The driver was wearing a seatbelt, and the airbags deployed, leaving him unharmed. Ari tried to run away, but was thrown to the ground by police officers as soon as he left the vehicle. On examining the vehicle, the police found several large, sealed plastic containers in the boot of the vehicle, which they opened to their shock and horror. Inside were fragments of a dismembered female body, covered with a strange-smelling, murky liquid. The interrogation and the killer's attempts to evade responsibility. Once Ari was brought to the station for questioning, he stated that he had schizophrenia, autism, psychosis, and bipolar affective disorder, as his psychiatrist could confirm. He also added that he was unable to distinguish between right and wrong because of his diagnoses, so he did not know what he was doing. He then asked whether he would be tried if his diagnoses were confirmed and what punishment he would face. Ari categorically refused to plead guilty. During interrogations, he would call himself a god or claim that he was possessed by demons and needed the help of an exorcist. At times, Ari's speech became incoherent, as if he began to talk to an invisible interlocutor, completely ignoring the police. The psychiatric examination confirmed that the accused indeed suffers from a number of mental disorders, but at the same time, it was proved that he is quite able to give an account of his actions. Also during the interrogations, the psychiatrist who observed the guy's behavior concluded that even when talking to himself, he always listened attentively to what was being said to him and what questions were being asked. This was evident from his reactions, clarifications, and sudden mood swings. The main reason why Ari was so vividly and demonstratively showing his insanity was an attempt to avoid severe punishment and minimize his responsibility before the law. He was clever and intelligent enough, so he tried to confuse the investigation and convince others of his insanity. The investigation and the unexpected results of the search. Despite the fact that from the very beginning, no one doubted that Ari had committed a terrible crime, his guilt had to be proved, and this required hard evidence. It was decided to start with a search in their family home, where, as expected, the murder took place. There, the police found washed-up traces of blood on the kitchen floor, in the corridor, and in the bathroom. In the dishwasher lay a bloody hacksaw, which the young man had apparently used to cut up his mother's body. The place for this gruesome act was the bathtub, which had numerous jagged chips on its edges. The expert examination showed that Beverly was poisoned with potassium cyanide, and after her death, her body was dismembered with a hacksaw and packed into containers. Vials with the said poisonous substance were found in the kitchen, in Ari's room, as well as in the basement of the house, where the guy had a kind of chemical laboratory. In addition, in his bedroom, under the bed was found the corpse of Beverly's favorite cat, which was also poisoned with poison. This suggested that the perpetrator first practiced on the animal before killing the mother. By the way, remember the strange liquid in which the fragments of the dismembered body were placed? As it turned out, it had a special chemical composition which is able to accelerate the process of decomposition of tissue. Ari found the recipe on the internet and decided to literally dissolve the corpse and hide the bones in the mountains so that they would never be found. A picture of the crime and the killer's justification. Based on all the evidence found, the following picture of the massacre emerged. On the eve of the tragedy, Ari had a big row with his mother and threatened to kill her again. He was so convincing that Beverly, seriously afraid for her life, called her son's psychiatrist with a request to immediately hospitalize him. However, the specialist ignored the request, believing that his patient was not dangerous to others. In the evening, the young man, having previously tested the effects of the poison on a cat, poisoned his mother, took her body to the bathroom, and began to cut it up with a hacksaw. How he got his mother to take potassium cyanide remains a mystery to this day. It probably took Ari all night to complete the gruesome job because in the morning, when Seth called the house phone, the perpetrator was still in the house. Ari then carelessly cleaned up the blood, stuffed the saw into the dishwasher, and packed the body into several containers filled with chemicals. He took the containers to the boot of his mother's car, which he used to leave the house. The further events are already known to you. When this version was presented to the defendant, supported by hard evidence, he suddenly began to justify himself and change his testimony. Ari stated that his mother took her own life by taking the poison voluntarily, and he only found her lifeless body. According to the guy, he was greatly afraid that he would be left without means of subsistence, as he himself did not work and lived at her expense. Then he decided to get rid of the body so that she would be considered missing. According to his plan, he himself was to remain living in the house and could continue to use the deceased's bank cards and accounts. The young man's story sounded wild and crazy. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he was mentally ill, but it was also obvious that he had carefully planned the crime in advance. It was not a temporary insanity, a state of affect, or a fit of aggression. He had thought out every step and acted accordingly to the plan. One of the main evidences that the crime was pre-planned was Ari's possession of chemicals accelerating decomposition of the body, which he had purchased in advance. Moreover, according to his search history, he had studied them in detail months before the crime, the trial, and sentence. As I have already said, the psychiatric examination confirmed Ari's diagnoses, but the experts gave an unequivocal conclusion that he was aware of his actions and had carefully prepared in advance for the massacre of his mother. He himself continued to insist on his insanity, although he realized that it was useless to feign insanity. The trial took place in November of the same year, a month and a half after the crime that shook the entire state. Lawyers desperately tried to prove that the defendant cannot be criminally responsible because of his illness and needs treatment. Ari himself claimed that his mother hated him, so passed the hereditary disease to him, while his sister was completely normal. He also called himself a victim of crazy Beverly and blamed his parent for all his troubles. Seth appeared in court as a witness and said that his late lover, and he himself, frankly afraid of Ari because they did not know what to expect from him. He was incredibly cruel to others, showed sadistic tendencies, and refused to take prescribed medication to suppress outbursts of aggression. He also added that Beverly's fear for her son had transformed into her fear of her own son. The court found Beverly Liggett guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of ever being eligible for parole. The jury unanimously found his actions to be cold-blooded and calculated. The 26-year-old defendant listened to his verdict in silence, his head down, and seemingly unconcerned. Libby Liggett, after the trial, admitted that she believed her brother was 100% guilty of what he had done. But at the same time, she noted that, perhaps, the tragedy could have been avoided if the specialists to whom the family repeatedly turned for help conscientiously performed their duties and in time to respond to the alarming messages Beverly. As of today, Beverly Liggett is serving his life sentence in a Colorado state prison. All of his attempts to appeal and challenge the court's decision have been rejected. Martin Gardner sat on the porch of his desolate home, clutching a photo album he had received years after the tragic day. That album had become a symbol of his loss, a living testament to a terrible tragedy. Martin's gaze stopped at the pictures of his small and innocent children, Talen, Sai, Savi, and Yazi. These pictures were all he had left of his happy days. As he looked into their faces, he could almost hear their children's voices filling this house with laughter and warmth once upon a time. Martin's first child was Talon, who was only 4 years old. To his father, he was the light of his life. The man dreamed of spending all his free time with him, teaching him everything he knew, and drinking beer with him in the future, when Talon would be a real grown man, and Martin himself would be gray and important. Little Saya, who was only 3 years old, always ran to her father when he came home from work, remembering to take her cloth doll with her. She always asked Martin to give her and her doll a kiss before she went to bed. This always brought a smile to her father's face, and he performed this sweet ritual with seriousness and respect. Savi, a 2-year-old girl, was silent and intelligent. She loved to flip through books and watch animal movies. Martin often took her on his lap and read her favorite stories to her. He saw in her the potential of a future intelligent and serious woman who would achieve great heights in life. And Yazi was the youngest, still a very tiny baby with deep black eyes. When Martin looked into her eyes, he saw a vast world there. Those eyes were exactly like those of her mother, Shenia Gardner. Martin remembered how happy he was that she had given him this beautiful world full of love, comfort, and children's laughter. But that world was shattered one fateful day. Shenia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, the American state of Tennessee. Little is known about her early years, other than the fact that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who once inhabited the cozy cabins of Madison, Alabama. Shenia's childhood and youth flowed as routinely as any other girl's. At that time, she was a young brunette with curly hair, slender and beautiful. The girl was always surrounded by loyal friends and displayed bright talents. Shenia was filled with a true creative spirit. She had a unique gift of composing songs. Music was her passion, and singing was her way of expressing herself. Her vocal abilities caught the attention of the locals, and she became a local celebrity. However, singing was only one of her many hobbies. Shenia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She looked great in front of the camera and could turn everyday moments into works of art. Despite all these colorful hobbies, inside Shenia was a woman full of charity who always found time for religion. She often attended church and carefully cared for her family. Everything in Shenia's life seemed set and promised a bright future. Shenia was only 14 years old when she met Detrail Clayton. It started with a casual introduction through mutual friends. They immediately found common ground and became friends. By the time they grew up and graduated from high school, their relationship became more serious, and the young people officially became a couple. Shenia and Detrail spent a lot of time together. Everyone considered them serious and stable young people. However, there were some questionable episodes in their record. Both were seen in minor offenses, such as traffic violations or disorderly conduct on the streets. In 2008, things got more serious. Detrail was accused of assaulting a woman, and although it was done unintentionally, he was facing serious punishment. The guy got lucky, and soon all charges against him were dropped. Shenia and Detrail did not formalize their relationship, but they lived together. In the same year 2008, the couple had a son, who was named Dallin. Shenia became a caring mother, not only to him, but also to Detrail's 2 children from his previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Detrail's mother, always saw Shenia not just as a woman in love with her son, but as part of her family. Shenia was noted for her devotion and care for her children, which made her special in Sonia's eyes. However, the lovers' relationship was not a long one, and little is known about what exactly happened between them. However, even after the breakup, they continued to maintain some distant communication. To Detrail, Shenia remained a good wife and a caring mother. When Dallin was just 2 years old, Shenia was involved in a small incident. It was a minor infraction, perhaps a parking ticket or a minor argument of no great importance. It was also insignificant compared to what the future held for her. Marrying Martin Gardner was a new phase in Shenia's life. Fate had led her to this man who appeared to bring joy and stability to her life. Shenia, on the other hand, won Martin over with her kindness and love for children. In her eyes, he saw an ocean of feminine tenderness and wisdom. Their story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to start their life together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding was just the beginning of a new phase of their life together. Shortly after the celebration, they had their first child, baby Talon, and in 2014, little Saya was born into the world. Soon, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, came along, making their big family even happier and busier. In total, Martin and Shenia had 4 children together, as well as 1 child from the young woman's previous relationship. For the young mom, children always came first, and she enjoyed working part-time at the children's hospital. Moreover, She was actively involved in a center that raised funds to help children. It was her calling, and she gratefully dedicated her life to helping those in need on the cusp of a terrible event. Friday, July 1st, 2016, an ordinary day that didn't portend anything out of the ordinary. Around noon, Shenia was on the phone with her husband, Martin. Her voice was calm, as it usually is. She told her husband that she was going to watch a movie with the kids. There was nothing to indicate that something terrible was going to happen on this ordinary day. And then, at that moment when the spouses were having a quiet conversation, an incomprehensible madness began to happen. Suddenly, Shenia changed. She took a kitchen knife and went into the living room. There, she attacked her own 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless little girl who couldn't fight back was caught in a terrible trap. Her life was cut short in an instant at the hands of her most loved and closest person. Dallin, the oldest of the children, he was only 7 years old, witnessed this nightmarish scene. A terrible tragedy played out before his eyes, for which he was too young to understand. The boy thought only one thing: he must do something to save his younger brother and sisters. Panicked and desperate, he ran out of the house. Shenia didn't stop there. The young woman followed her son out of the house, armed with a knife, ready to continue her nightmarish plan. She rushed after Dallin, but the man, terrified and desperate, screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors heard his screams and quickly went outside to see what was going on. They found themselves witnessing a nightmare that did not settle in their nines. Realizing that Dallin was being watched, Shenia went no further. However, the whole horror was not over yet. Shenia returned to the house where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went up to the bedroom where the little ones were. It was the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the nightmare didn't waste a second. They quickly called emergency services, asking for help and rescue for little Dallin and his younger siblings. At that moment, none of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. Sheriff's personnel arrived on the scene and were confronted with an eerie scene. Inside the home at 7449 Southern Hill Drive, they found a bloodied Shenia and her 4 children lying motionless, bereft of life. The sight left everyone in shock. Shenia sat with her cell phone in her hands. She slowly dialed the number of Martin, her husband. Her voice sounded quiet and cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had unfolded in their lives was the horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and special unit arrived on the scene, it was all over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been the place of the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror lurked in every corner. The investigators had a bloody knife in their possession, silently bearing witness to the gruesome incident. Chaplains arrived to help and were shocked by what had happened, as well as specialists ready to assist Dallin. The horror he had endured required immediate intervention. While the necessary information was gathered and investigations were underway, law enforcement asked residents to stay inside their homes and not go outside. Some did not need this request. They still felt fear and uncertainty. Their home seemed to be the only safe place. A major operation forced sheriff's officials to close off access to the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. As for Shenia, she was apprehended and taken into custody without bail. Her trial was immediately scheduled for July 5th. Society could not remain indifferent to these horrific events unfolding in the life of Shenia Gardner. No matter how monstrous she was portrayed, she was a mother and a partner who radiated love, care, and joy, according to Michelle Jamal, her co-worker. Michelle vigorously defended Shenia on social media, speaking out about the unfairness of the allegations. She also brought up an important aspect: postpartum depression. Cases like this have sparked discussion, and Dr. Joel Reisman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that the killing of children by their own mother is rare and usually accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed out the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, a psychology and postpartum health specialist, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that they are completely different conditions with different symptoms. And while Shenia's exact condition required further investigation, Dr. Barnes doubted that women in a state of postpartum depression would commit such acts. She leaned toward the idea of psychosis. The investigation in Shenia Gardner's case was arduous. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, became her defense attorney, but he chose not to comment on the case to the media in the early stages, believing it was too early for such discussions. On July 5, 2016, at the court hearing, Shenia remained silent, appearing only via video link. Judge Lois Lambert asked her questions, but the young woman did not utter a single word. After the trial, Shenia was sent to the Mental Health Institute. Shenia's next of kin came to the courthouse, but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols planned to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. January 2017 brought formal charges against Shenia on 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and gruesome investigation continued, and the community was left waiting for justice and answers to many questions. The hearing included testimony from Shenia's loved ones. On that fateful day, Sonia, Detrail's mother, was undoubtedly shocked to learn of the terrible tragedy. She immediately arrived on the scene in a desperate search for her grandson, Dowan. Sonia maintained that what had happened had nothing to do with the young woman she had once known. She expressed her belief that something supernatural, perhaps of a diabolical nature, was behind it all. As time passed, however, and the initial shock began to wear off, Sonia began to speculate about possible motives. She speculated that perhaps the young couple was in the process of divorce. For fear of being alone, caring for 5 children, Shenia might have come to the terrible decision to end it all. But despite these reflections, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shenia she had once known was far from a person capable of such a horrible act. Detrail, Dowan's father, also refused to believe in Shenia's guilt. He admitted that although he was never his son's guardian, he was always able to visit him after his relationship with Shenia ended. But November 2014 was the last time he saw his son. He noticed that each time Shenia became more and more radical in her actions and decisions. Every attempt he made to contact his son failed, and he was simply not allowed to be involved in his life. But in fact, Shenia's friends and family had long ago noticed that a completely unexpected upheaval had taken place with her. The young woman began to experience a strange discomfort, but gradually developed into deep anxiety, paranoia, and even worse, panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and many people began to suspect that it might be related to postpartum depression. This came as a real shock to those around her, as Shenia seemed to be a strong and dependable woman. She had always been the one in control, but now she seemed to have lost her footing. Her sudden change in behavior made many people wonder why this tragic situation happened. The first signs of strange behavior began in March 2015, and none of her friends and family could figure out what was going on. One day, Shenia left work early and picked up her children. With 5 children in the family car, she headed down an unknown road leading away from their home. At the time, her husband Martin assumed that his wife had gone for a walk and to unwind in some park. This was quite typical of her daily routine. However, as the hours passed, she never returned home. Very disturbed, Martin decided to put out an APB for his wife. At the wheel, with 5 children in the cabin, Shenia headed east and traveled more than 74 miles separating Memphis from Corinth, but she didn't know anyone here, and she had no apparent reason to go there in particular. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but police never revealed how or why she ended up there. Shallow cuts were found on her neck and one of her wrists. If she was trying to take her own life, her only witnesses were her children, but they were too young to realize what was happening. Shenia was eventually returned home by authorities, but after that, even more bizarre behavior began. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family. Her husband was shocked, as Shenia provided no details about who it might be or why, and there were no prior instances of such threats. Also, when Shenia was with family and friends, she started complaining about her work and workload. She claimed that she felt very bad about it. Soon, she began to claim that some of her co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these abnormalities, Shenia showed no signs of abuse or violence toward her children or others. The long wait for trial was not an easy one, and it was severely delayed due to the numerous psychiatric evaluations the defendant had to undergo. Added to this came the COVID pandemic, which only added to the length of the trial, longer than anyone expected. In 2021, the non-jury trial finally began. The defense focused its strategy on Shenia's mental illness argument. The prosecutors acknowledged her said mental illness, but they insisted that the defendant was still capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Finally, a Shelby County Criminal Court judge, James, rejected the defense, and in December 2021, Shenia Gardner was found guilty of all charges against her. In February 2022, Shenia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, with her husband Martin also in attendance. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder, as well as 15 years for each additional count of child abuse and neglect. Shenia will only be able to apply for the possibility of parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. Given the 5 years she spent in prison prior to sentencing, Shenia will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, when she will be 80 years old. After sentencing, the prosecutor stated that he agreed with the decision because it was consistent with their desire to achieve justice for Martin and his children. In turn, Martin expressed some relief upon learning that Shenia would never be able to harm any children again. Sonia, Dallin's grandmother, stood among people, including neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers, during an evening vigil at the apartment complex where the family lived. In remembrance of the innocent victims, those who came to say goodbye held red and white candles and prayed several times for the souls of the departed. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church noted that the vigil was the beginning of a healing process for the entire community, because in the end, the only thing in the hands of those present was a desire to support the surviving baby and his father and help them through this difficult moment. DeTrail did not attend the memorial ceremony. On his behalf, Sonia told the media that he was too overwhelmed with anger to show up for the ceremony. The president and CEO of the children's hospital where Shenia worked also expressed their condolences on behalf of everyone at the hospital. Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him with funeral arrangements for his 4 children. During the ceremony, while saying a few words about his children and family, Martin showed incredible fortitude and nobility in his words. In his final speech, he emphasized that his home was happy when his children and Shenia were there, and that this is how it will remain in his memory forever. Over the years, however, the definition has evolved and varies across countries, depending on cultural context. In most places, it is classified as a severe crime against women, including assault, maiming, or causing death, perpetrated by men amid gender-based animosity. It's often said that women allow themselves to be mistreated, not reporting to police or leaving the men who cause them emotional and physical suffering, and sometimes even continuing to live with someone who might end their life at any moment. This claim is only partially true, as in some countries, the law inherently sides with men, giving them confidence that they will face no repercussions. The story of a young woman named Abil Perez is one of the most vivid examples of how femicide thrives among the affluent sectors of Mexican society. She and her husband, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, were wealthy and respected individuals, holding executive positions in major companies, and from the outside, their marriage seemed flawless. Yet this did not prevent the man from abusing his wife over the years and eventually having someone else violently end her life, also risking the lives of their children. To this day, this case remains unresolved, and all but the main perpetrator have been punished. Abil Perez, family and early years. Abril Sagaon. Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, in the northeastern part of Mexico, and was the second of 3 children to parents Maria del Socorro Sagaon and Manuel Perez. Raised alongside her older brother Javier and younger sister Ama, the family lived modestly, but her parents did everything possible to provide their children with a good education and motivate them to aspire to a better life. All the children excelled in school, engaged in music, sports, and other talents. Abil, in particular, showed a talent for mathematics and entrepreneurial skills from an early age. She was an avid reader and the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abil began working to achieve financial independence, was frugal, and always had savings. From her school days, she was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. She dreamed of obtaining a high-quality higher education to secure a well-paying job with career advancement opportunities. After finishing high school, Abil was admitted to the most prestigious university in Nuevo León, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, incredibly focused and ambitious, but also cheerful, kind-hearted, and always ready to help others. Upon graduating, Perez was hired in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. A few years later, she ventured into digital sales, a new booming field, and realized this was her calling. Quickly rising through the ranks, she became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abil was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and steadily advancing towards the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, supported her family, and was full of plans for the future. Yet her personal life remained unsettled, which disappointed her loved ones. Nevertheless, she was confident she would find true love and live a long, happy life. Little did Perez know how her marriage to the perfect man would turn out. Meeting Juan Carlos. In the mid-1990s, as Abil's career was on the rise, fate brought her together with a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. He was just 3 years her senior and equally ambitious career-wise, which greatly appealed to her. In return, he was captivated by her beauty, charm, kindness, and disarming smile, combined with a sharp intellect and remarkable determination. Sanchez was a graduate of a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in the economics and trade department. He later continued his education in the United States at Harvard University, after which he returned to Mexico and built a successful career in the relatively new field of e-commerce. The young professionals met at a conference dedicated to the latest financial technologies. They crossed paths several more times as their companies collaborated on joint projects, and eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had fallen in love with this intelligent beauty. Through mutual acquaintances, he obtained her phone number and decided to invite Perez out on a date. The feelings were mutual. She also found this educated, erudite man capable of holding a conversation on almost any topic, appealing and interesting. Their relationship developed quickly, and by 1998, the couple decided to formalize their relationship with a lavish wedding. By then, they had both achieved considerable career success and were involved in developing online stores, a very promising direction. Their life resembled a true fairy tale, evoking envy and admiration among their peers. Dark secrets of the perfect family. It wasn't until 2001, after 3 years of marriage, that the couple welcomed their long-awaited first child, a daughter they named Anna Cecilia. 30-year-old Abil was overjoyed, as the arrival of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy, treating their newborn daughter with tenderness and awe. 2 years later, Abil gave her beloved a son, whom they named after his father, Juan Carlos Jr. Another 2 years passed, and the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andreas. It's worth noting that the young mother hardly took any maternity leave and managed to brilliantly combine parental responsibilities with her career advancement. She prepared only homemade meals, helped the children with their schoolwork, took them to sports activities, and strived to be not just an ideal mother, but also their best friend. From the outside, the Perez Sanchez family appeared perfect in every way. Wealthy, successful, raising 3 wonderful children, having everything one could wish for, and seeming very happy. But appearances can be deceiving. What happened inside their home remained unknown even to the couple's closest relatives for a long time. In reality, Juan Carlos showed his true nature in the first years of their life together. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and rather harsh, intolerant of compromise, insisting that everything had to be exactly as he wanted. But Abil was in love. and initially thought that over time they would rub along and his character would soften. Moreover, their joint projects united them. They worked towards a common goal, and their teamwork yielded impressive results, including financially. However, over time, he became more irritable, and verbal altercations escalated into physical confrontations. After the birth of their first daughter, the husband briefly softened, trying to keep his emotions in check, but it didn't last long. The same happened after the birth of their eldest son, but by the time the third child was born, he no longer even tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos vented his anger, negative emotions, or just bad mood on his wife, sparing no feelings. He insulted and belittled the mother of his children, and her tears seemed to lift his spirits. He then began to regularly physically harm his wife, often doing so in a way that left no visible marks on exposed parts of her body, so she could hide the bruises under clothing or mask them with makeup. All this was done with one simple purpose: to protect his flawless reputation and pride himself on being considered a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abil kept silent for years, trying not to tell even her sister and mother about the ongoing nightmare. She earned well and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and a stable upbringing. But her husband was a wealthy and very influential man, and he could easily take the children away from her through the courts. Knowing what Juan Carlos was really like, Perez could not bear the thought of her daughter and sons being left alone with a real monster, capable of anything, starting over with old problems. 2010 approached. The situation within the family escalated to its limit, to the extent that those who once considered this household ideal began to suspect something terrible was happening within. Abil was not just subdued, but deeply distressed, visibly thinner, sleeping poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that became increasingly difficult to conceal and impossible for her to explain. Juan Carlos maintained a calm and confident demeanor, pretending that nothing was wrong. In public, he continued to play the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with his wife politely and affectionately, but at home, he transformed into a monster, making it increasingly dangerous to be near him. Despite pleas from loved ones to divorce, Abil stubbornly insisted that everything was fine and that she would handle the problems with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the head of a major trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After this promotion, the family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's best neighborhoods. Their children attended an elite private school, and a beleaguered Perez sincerely hoped that the move and complete change in scenery would positively affect their relationship. Contrary to expectations, it changed. The man continued to physically harm and insult his wife, increasingly doing so in front of their children. Furthermore, Juan Carlos began to groundlessly accuse his wife of infidelity, and whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to using his fists, claiming he would find evidence of her disloyalty. He monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and later, finding no evidence, even hired a private detective to follow Abil and photograph any men who came near her. 2 attempts on her life. For another 4 years, the woman tried everything to save her marriage, though her husband's behavior became utterly unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare that outwardly seemed like a happy and successful union. Many even envied Abil, as she had such a prominent, influential, wealthy, and as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family traveled to Monterrey to celebrate Catholic Christmas with the Perez family. However, Juan Carlos behaved toward his wife as he was accustomed, not shying away from her parents, who were horrified by what they witnessed. At that moment, the woman realized things could not continue this way and informed her husband that she would file for divorce once they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, in a fit of rage, he grabbed her throat and squeezed so tightly she nearly lost consciousness. Only her mother, Maria del Socorro, entering the room and raising the alarm, prevented a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abil, preparing for divorce, moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room, but this did not save her from the tyrant. On the morning of January 4th, while she was still asleep, her husband entered the bedroom holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Perez barely understood what was happening, but managed to slip off the bed just in time, literally saving her own life. The woman began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat from his father. Together with their mother, they fled the house and headed to the hospital as Abil needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed her with a serious concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Marital conflict. As soon as his wife and sons left the home, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to explain the situation and asked for help in resolving it. He also posted on his social media page, claiming that his wife had betrayed him, was unfaithful, and intended to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to take all their jointly acquired assets. Moreover, he claimed that his wife had stolen all the money from their home safe and that when he tried to stop her, she injured him with a knife in the shoulder. As proof, he posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually Abil's from her own room, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Nonetheless, Sanchez's friends believed his story and began actively sharing and reposting his account on their personal social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this egregious case. While still in the hospital, Perez filed a police report against her husband, accusing him of attempting to end her life. After being discharged, she moved out of their home, taking her sons with her, over whom she was granted temporary sole custody. Their eldest daughter, by then an adult who had finished school and moved to another city for college, also sided with her mother, condemning her father's cruel and unacceptable behavior. Sanchez was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they stayed with their mother, although the amount was quite small, about $300, which he disagreed with. He himself faced a potential prison sentence, but the influential businessman was confident he would remain free and avoid any punishment. After enduring such a nightmare, Abil decided to return to her native Monterrey, to her parents' home, taking her children with her. It was there that she filed for divorce, and from there she monitored the situation. Meanwhile, she began offering help and online consultations to women in similar situations, and she planned to open a center for psychological and legal assistance for victims of domestic violence. Corrupt justice system. Only in September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, was Sanchez finally arrested on charges of femicide, inflicting bodily harm and attempting to end his wife's life. He was placed in jail, where he spent over a month, but by November of that year, he managed to appeal the pretrial detention decision and was released. The case was presided over by Judge Federico Mas, who unexpectedly reclassified it, leading to a new trial. During the trial, photographs of Perez from the hospital and entries from her medical records were not presented, and the testimonies of the woman and her sons were deemed insufficient grounds for detaining Juan Carlos. Furthermore, the defendant insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. The defendant was released directly from the courtroom, as Judge Mas considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Sanchez had truly intended to end his wife's life, he would have followed through, especially since she was asleep during the attack and unable to resist. Abil was shocked and frightened by this turn of events. She realized that her ex-husband had utilized all his connections and paid off the right people to be set free, putting her and her children in danger. She sent an official letter to the judge expressing fear for her life, but it had no impact on the situation. Immediately after being released, Juan Carlos began legal proceedings against his ex-wife for custody of their sons. He forced her and the children to return to Mexico City to attend court sessions. Otherwise, the matter could be resolved in absentia, not in her favor, so she was compelled to return to the capital. Tragedy. Witnessed by children. On November 25th, Abil arrived in Mexico City with her children. She genuinely feared the man she had lived with for over 20 years and did not want to encounter him unnecessarily. She planned to leave the city the same day after the hearing and had already purchased plane tickets, which Juan Carlos knew about. Ironically, on that day, a mass demonstration against gender-based violence was taking place in the capital. Immediately after the court session, the woman, along with her sons and their lawyer, got into a car heading to the airport, but they never reached their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist pulled up next to their car, unexpectedly drew a handgun, and fired twice at Perez, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, before swiftly fleeing the scene. One of the bullets passed through and grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately, none of the children were seriously hurt. The injured woman was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors fought desperately for over 6 hours to save her life. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save 48-year-old Abil, who passed away that evening. The victim's parents, brother, and sister flew to the capital immediately and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, convinced that he was behind this brutal act that occurred in front of the children. However, law enforcement had a different view, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to discuss his motives, and it could not be definitively claimed that it was a hitman sent by Sanchez. The case was not classified as femicide until further investigation. Predictably, Juan Carlos remained free, and the police began searching for the shooter, which could take an extended period. The orphaned children were temporarily placed under the care of their maternal relatives, while their father prepared to fight for them in court again. Abil's sister wrote an angry post on her social media account openly blaming Sanchez for the incident, but her page was soon blocked and later deleted. Nonetheless, the family decided to fight and draw heightened public attention to the case, highlighting that the attack on Perez happened on the day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence, public outcry, and the flight of the main suspect. The victims' relatives managed to draw attention to the tragedy that struck their family. Moreover, people openly discussed numerous cases where men attempted to end women's lives, but did not follow through and remained free without facing any punishment. Due to the significant public outcry, the General Prosecutor's Office of Mexico initiated a new investigation concerning Sanchez and was also instructed to check the legality of the actions of the judges who had released him. The judges handling Juan Carlos's case were temporarily suspended from work and later removed from their positions. Mexican politician and women's rights defender Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo officially confirmed that the Perez case had been reclassified as femicide and would be reinvestigated, and the judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for the woman's death if his guilt was proven. The businessman regularly posted on social media calling for the perpetrator of his former wife to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He also noted that despite the disagreements between him and Abil, he would never dare harm the mother of his children, let alone end her life in front of their sons. However, his daughter Ana Cecilia left an angry comment under one of these posts, accusing her father of cruelty and accompanying her words with photos of her mother taken in the hospital after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat. Despite the resonance and widespread media coverage of the case, it was decided to leave Sanchez free during the investigation. He was placed under a restraining order and required to check in weekly at a police station, but after he failed to appear at the appointed time, a warrant for his arrest was issued for violating the order. As one might guess, no one could find the accused. It turned out that the businessman again used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting the fugitive accused of a serious crime, and the next day, Sanchez was declared wanted almost worldwide. Arrest of hired criminals and reconstruction of the crime scene. During this time, efforts were underway to locate the hired criminal who, it turned out, did not work alone. Surveillance footage from street cameras clearly showed 2 vehicles following the car from the courthouse, in which Abil, her children, and their lawyer were traveling. The motorcyclist, who later emerged and performed the lethal act, appeared to be in constant communication with the individuals in the aforementioned cars, receiving directions and instructions. It took investigators several months to identify just some of the participants of the incident, and it wasn't until March 5, 2020, that 2 suspects were arrested in connection to the case. Surprisingly, they did not resist arrest and almost immediately started giving testimonies, hoping to mitigate their sentences. It was confirmed that the orchestrator of the crime was indeed Juan Carlos, who had paid a substantial amount, with 7 people directly involved in carrying out the act. The first to be apprehended were the driver of one of the chase cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It emerged that, while in prison, Juan Carlos had hired a couple of seasoned criminals to protect him, acting as his personal bodyguards. One of these criminals was released a week before Sanchez, and the other was freed several days after him. Once out of prison, the businessman reconnected with them, asking them to find reliable people to carry out the elimination of a person, promising a substantial sum of money to each if successful. When all participants were identified, the orchestrator transferred the promised money and provided precise instructions about the route and vehicle Abil would be using. The most challenging part of the plan turned out to be luring his former wife to Mexico City. The man resorted to blackmail, threatening to take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court appearance, she had no intention of staying in the capital, planning to return to Monterrey the same day, and Juan Carlos knew this from his sources. Despite this information, it wasn't until the end of October 2020 that 3 more participants in the criminal conspiracy were apprehended. Moreover, the arrest of these criminals was initially on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, and it was only at the police station that it was discovered these individuals could be involved in the high-profile crime. All arrested were part of a major drug trafficker, Juan Carlos Maldonado's gang, known as Juan Balto. He had served time with Sanchez and provided him protection, later agreeing to assist in eliminating his former wife for a hefty reward. Maldonado was arrested a couple of weeks later in November 2020. He began giving testimonies, confirming that the businessman had sought reliable individuals to end his ex-wife's life, and he agreed to help him in return for a substantial reward. There was no doubt left that Sanchez was both the client and organizer of the crime, and his previous assault on Abil with a bat was officially reclassified as an attempt on her life, leading the court to finally issue an arrest warrant for him on charges of femicide. However, the man's whereabouts remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in the commissioned perpetration of Perez were found and arrested. Notably, one of them was already serving a sentence for another crime at the time. Also, during extensive searches, the weapon used to make the fatal shots was found. In total, 9 people associated with the same criminal group were detained, 7 of whom were directly involved in chasing and shooting Abil. Almost 5 years after the woman's death, the main culprit and client of the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, remains at large, with his whereabouts still undetermined. The individual who pulled the trigger, ending the life of a mother of 3, was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who chased the car and coordinated the shooter's actions were also sentenced to 50 years each. The other arrested participants of the incident are still under investigation, and their fate has yet to be decided. The tragic story of a young school teacher named Laci Peterson not only shocked the public with its unimaginable cruelty and inhumanity, but also served as a precedent for the adoption of a law of the same name, known as the Laci and Connor Act. Connor was the name of her unborn son, who died with his mother, and the law itself was designed to protect children from violence before they were born, and to punish those who infringe on their lives and health. The case itself is far from unique, but the fact that a pregnant woman was abused by a close person who was supposed to protect and care for her is shocking and bewildering. Several TV documentaries have been made about the case. Despite the circumstantial evidence and controversial evidence, no one doubted the guilt of the defendant, and he himself, with all his appearance, demonstrated that he is not sorry and does not repent for what he did. This story is one of those that causes chills all over the body, but let's try to understand how it happened that the guy, who was considered a model family man, suddenly decided to commit such an atrocity. Who was Laci Peterson? Laci Denise Peterson, maiden name Rocha, was born in May 1975 in a small town of Modesto, located in the central part of the state of California. Her parents, Dennis Rocha and Sharon Anderson, were acquainted since high school. Their teenage romance led to marriage and the birth of 2 children, eldest son Brandon and daughter Laci. Curiously, the mother named her daughter after a local beauty queen whom she herself admired. The family owned their own farm, so the children from a young age were accustomed to working in the field, as well as taking care of animals. The girl was very close to her mother. Together they grew a wonderful garden with flowers and fruit trees. Then Laci first thought about connecting her future life with this occupation and getting a specialized profession. When the children were still small, the family faced a crisis. No matter how hard the spouses tried, but they could not save the marriage, and soon they officially divorced. The children, by mutual consent, remained to live with their mother in their hometown. 2 years later, Sharon remarried. Her chosen one was a friend of her youth named Ron Gransky. Ron treated his wife's children as his own, and in fact replaced their birth father, who after the divorce was not too interested in the life of the heirs. The girl even began to call him Daddy, and a couple of years later the couple had a common daughter who was named Emily. Laci grew up a kind, sociable, and open girl. She always had a lot of friends. She studied well in school and was also a member of the cheerleading team. After receiving a high school education, the dark-haired beauty successfully passed exams and entered the prestigious California State University. She did not forget about her childhood dream and decided to become a landscape designer. Laci has always been a creative person, good at drawing, so she found the chosen profession ideal for herself. Who is Scott Peterson? Scott Lee Peterson is also a native of California, only he was born in the large metropolis of San Diego, in the southwest of the state, in 1972, October 24th, in the family of Jacqueline Helena Leatham and Arthur Lee Peterson. The boy grew up in a fairly well-to-do family, and from an early age did not know anything to refuse. His father had his own business associated with the production of packaging materials, and his mother owned a store of designer clothes. By the way, her boutique was located in Hollywood, so among the regular customers were many celebrities. Scott, in childhood, began to show his difficult character, liked to be in the center of attention, did not tolerate bans or refusals, and in school about him spoke as a spoiled, capricious, and even arrogant child. From a young age, the boy played golf and even thought about a professional career in this sport. In his school years, he was friends with Philip Nicholson, nicknamed Lefty, the future professional golfer, who in 2012 was ranked second in the world rankings. As a teenager, Scott himself was among the best athletes in San Diego. After graduation, the young man became a student at one of the universities of the state of Arizona, where he, as a promising athlete, paid half of the cost of education. However, Peterson could not get a diploma because he was expelled for inappropriate behavior after a raucous party, drinking strong alcohol in the company of other students. After several months of reflection and searching for a suitable place, the young man applied to the University of California, where he first planned to study economics, but later changed his mind and transferred to the Faculty of Agriculture. By the way, this time Scott very seriously and responsibly approached the educational process, becoming an exemplary student, because his parents threatened to leave their son without a livelihood if he was once again expelled. Scott and Laci, a love story. Young people met during the period of study at the university. Scott at that time began to work part-time in one of the local coffee shops, where there also worked as a waitress former classmate and close friend of Laci. Laci often stopped by to grab a bite to eat and see her friend, and at some point, she noticed the handsome young man. Scott also noticed the smiling petite brunette and began to pay her every possible attention. One day, when Laci came to the coffee shop but didn't see her friend there, she decided to ask Scott what was wrong. They quickly got to talking, but since Scott had to work, Laci wrote her phone number on a napkin so they could get in touch later. Scott called her back that evening, and an excited Laci, immediately after talking to him, told her mother that she had been in touch with her future husband. A couple days later, he asked his new acquaintance out on a first date, and Laci readily accepted. It's worth noting that Peterson had another passion besides golf. fishing, and he decided to invite Laci to go deep-sea fishing in an open body of water. She accepted the offer, but she got seasick in the boat, so the couple had to quickly return to the shore. Family life. Nevertheless, after that not quite successful first date, the couple began to meet, and a couple of years later, they decided to start living together. Scott, by that time, finally abandoned his dreams of a professional career in sports and decided to start his own small business, and with the startup capital, he helped his parents. In the summer of 1997, after Laci received her diploma, the lovers played a modest wedding in the traditional style, with a white dress, veil, and vows at the altar. They invited only family members and a few close friends to the celebration, and as a venue, they chose the popular Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort, located on the ocean in the western part of the state of California. After the wedding, the couple settled in the small resort town of San Luis Obispo, located between Los Angeles and San Francisco. There they decided to open their own sports bar, but the idea was doomed from the start. There were rumors that Scott's parents again helped with the implementation of the business plan, but they themselves later denied it, saying that their son was a poor businessman, and they realized this while he was still studying at the university. Anyway, the business of the couple really did not go very well at first. They constantly had problems, then with the institution itself, then with the management, but gradually they managed to spin. The number of visitors over time increased, and in 2000, when the Petersons decided to sell the institution, it was already considered a fairly well-known and popular place. The couple decided to move to their hometown of Laci to put down roots and have children. There they bought a small, cozy house in a good neighborhood, bought a car, got a dog, and about a year later, the young woman told her husband the happy news. Soon they will become parents. By that time, Laci had decided to change her occupation and got a job at a local school as an art teacher. Her husband was having a harder time finding a job and was forced to take a job with a fertilizer and organic fertilizer company. Laci tried to be an impeccable wife, to create comfort and peace in her and her husband's new home. She kept everything in perfect order, enjoyed cooking, loved to host guests, and had a beautiful flower garden on the lawn. Scott seemed to support his wife in everything, and from the outside they looked like a perfect couple. The news of the upcoming addition to the family he also accepted with joy, and when the couple learned that they will have a boy, they actively began to choose a name for him. The future parents decided to name their son Connor, and everyone was sure that they were looking forward to the arrival of the child into the world. Disappearance of a pregnant teacher. On December 24, 2002, Laci, who was 8 months pregnant, mysteriously disappeared. The first alarms were raised by Laci's mother and stepfather, who had been unable to contact her all day. She didn't answer the phone, nor did she return calls, which was unusual for her. As it turned out, the husband was also unaware of his wife's whereabouts. The day before, she had visited her parents and also visited the beauty salon where her sister Amelia worked. She was in good spirits, preparing for Christmas and New Year's Eve celebrations. In the morning, Laci allegedly went for a walk with the dog, but a couple of hours later, neighbors found the Petersons' dog wandering down the street with a dirty leash dragging behind him. At the time, no one even suspected anything wrong. The neighbor, he said, simply thought the dog had escaped, so he took him to the backyard of the owner's residence. Toward evening, the worried parents called the police and reported him missing, asking them to start searching immediately because Laci was pregnant, and if she was in trouble, she needed help as soon as possible. But neither that day nor the next, she was never found. A day later, news of the local teacher's disappearance spread throughout the town, and hundreds of volunteers joined the search for her. People combed the area, pasted flyers with portraits of the girl, as well as organized search pages in social networks, where they posted detailed information with the signs of the missing. Mom, stepfather, older brother, and younger sister appealed to all concerned on television with a request to help in the search and share any useful information, for which a reward was even announced, except that Scott behaved somewhat strangely and even suspiciously. He did not take part in press conferences, was not too interested in the results of the search, and did not look particularly concerned. According to the investigator who handled the case, Mr. Peterson's behavior made him suspicious from the start. He was frighteningly calm, and the police officer's questions irritated him. He himself asked no questions, behaved arrogantly, and most interestingly, confused his statements, changing them repeatedly. Scott was the last person to see his spouse on the day of her disappearance. According to him, he went to the golf course in the morning to get some exercise and play, while his wife stayed home and planned to walk the dog and do some cleaning afterward. When he returned home, he found the dog in the backyard, but Laci was nowhere to be found. Scott did not go to the police because he thought that his wife was visiting her parents. But later, when she still did not show up, he got worried and called his mother-in-law's house, where he was told that Laci did not come to them. And that's where the first inconsistencies in Scott's testimony came to light. First, no one could confirm his alibi, as he had not been seen on the golf course. Second, the father-in-law claimed, and this was later confirmed by the taped conversations, that he had called Scott himself when he was looking for his stepdaughter, but he replied that he had no idea where she might be. Peterson then quickly changed tactics and stated that he had changed his mind about playing golf, deciding instead to go fishing at a secluded spot in Berkeley Harbor. He attributed the confusion over the phone calls to the fact that all the relatives were on edge and couldn't remember who had called whom or when. During the inspection of the couple's home, a rather strange and frightening detail was discovered: the missing Laci's purse, which contained her house keys, phone, and some cash. These are things that she certainly wouldn't have left the house without, even going for a walk to the nearest park with her dog. How would she lock the front door? This nuance was alarming and raised suspicions that Laci hadn't disappeared somewhere on the street, but had vanished from her own home. A grisly discovery. On April 13th, almost 4 months after the pregnant teacher's disappearance, local fishermen noticed something strange on the rocky shores of San Francisco Bay and decided to go closer to examine their find. As it turned out, their attention was drawn to the body of an infant that had been washed ashore. The boy's body had hardly undergone decomposition, but it was badly disfigured, apparently due to the fact that the body had been battered by the waves against the rocks for a long time. His umbilical cord was not cut, but as if torn off. A day later, in another part of the bay, a few kilometers from where the infant was found, the badly decomposed body of a young woman was found. The corpse was so disfigured that it was not immediately recognizable as human remains. But the most gruesome thing was that the body was missing its head and most of each of its limbs. There were only a few fragments of clothing left on the body, including a special maternity bra. It was simply impossible to identify the body, so it was possible to establish that it belonged to the missing teacher only through DNA examination. According to criminalists, the baby was well preserved only because all this time he was in the womb, but in the process of decomposition, the body rejected the fetus. According to eyewitnesses who found the boy, something strange resembling a ribbon or rope was draped around his neck, and there was a large cut on his body. Although the results of the autopsy were never officially published, the experts claimed that the cut was the result of a wave hitting the body against a sharp rock, and that the noose around his neck was just trash. Throughout the investigation and search, Scott remained at large. Moreover, Laci's parents actively defended their son-in-law for the first few days, calling him an ideal husband and their union a happy one, built on love and trust. But the more the police learned about this guy, the more suspicious he seemed to them. So soon it turned out that Peterson constantly cheated on his wife, and his first extramarital affair occurred almost immediately after the wedding, even before the couple moved to Modesto. Later, he had many more mistresses, to whom he lied about not being married or recently widowed. Thus, in the fall of 2002, Scott met on a blind date with a charming blonde named Amber Frey. The girl worked as a masseuse and raised a young daughter on her own. She was looking for a life partner who would love and accept her along with her child, and handsome, polite Scott she immediately liked. The feelings were mutual. Scott admitted almost immediately that he had recently been widowed, and the coming Christmas would be the first one he would spend without his beloved deceased wife. Amber consoled him as best she could, and from that day forward, they began communicating almost daily. Soon, Scott informed his mistress that they could move in together after the holidays, and the couple began planning a future together. True, Scott noted that he never wanted to have children of his own and seriously intends to undergo a sterilization procedure, vasectomy, but at the same time, he was ready to raise daughter Amber as his own. All was well until Amber accidentally saw a TV report about the disappearance of a local pregnant teacher. Despite the fact that the husband of the missing woman did not give interviews and did not appear in front of the camera lenses, the broadcast showed pictures of her and Laci together, in which Amber recognized her lover. Another curious feature was the fact that Scott, soon after the disappearance of his wife, radically changed his image, growing a beard and bleaching his naturally dark hair on his head and face. At first, Amber could not believe her eyes and hoped that she imagined it, but soon she was convinced that she was dating the same guy. She immediately went to the police and told them everything, even agreeing to record their phone conversations. During one of their conversations, Amber wondered why Scott had told her he was a widower a couple weeks before his wife disappeared, but he must have sensed something was wrong, but he was evasive. As soon as the bodies of the dead mother and child were discovered, the question of immediately arresting Scott as the prime suspect arose. Despite the fact that the investigation had no hard evidence, there was a high probability that Scott would try to leave the country. In fact, that's exactly what he was going to do, but fortunately, he didn't have time. The widower was taken into custody on April 18, 2003, but he categorically refused to admit his guilt. At the same time, his house, garage, and car were searched in detail, with frightening results. Microparticles of Laci's dried blood were found on tools in the garage, and in the trunk of the car and at the bottom of the fishing boat, experts found several hairs of the dead woman. The clothes Scott was wearing on that fateful day were long since gotten rid of. The house had undergone several general cleanings with the help of cleaning services, and the building itself had already been put up for sale. But the most difficult part of the investigation was the inability to establish the exact date of Laci's death, which in turn made it impossible to verify the suspect's alibi. The investigation was also hampered by traces of cement found in the garage, in the trunk, and in Peterson's boat. The material was believed to be the basis for a homemade anchor, with which he wanted to dispose of the body so that it would never be found. Although there was no direct evidence against Scott, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first and second-degree murder. Despite the vigorous and rather confident defense of the lawyers, almost no one had any doubts that Scott was guilty. The main proof of this was his behavior. He was not excited or upset. He took no part in the search. He was in a hurry to get rid of the evidence, put his wife's house and car for sale almost immediately after her disappearance, changed his image, and was going to leave the country with his mistress. Investigator Jonathan Buehler, who had been on the case since Laci's disappearance, said in court that he had no doubts about Peterson's guilt from the start. He realized this after his first conversation with him. The court initially imposed the death penalty as a punishment, but after a series of appeals filed with enviable regularity, the sentence was changed in 2021 to life imprisonment without the right to ever expect to be released. Also, the amount of the insurance, in the amount of $250,000 for the life of Laci, which was originally assigned in favor of Scott, the court redirected the mother of the deceased. This high-profile case horrified the public and raised the issue of the need to protect unborn children from violence who may become victims of similar crimes. Thus, in the spring of 2004, the Laci Encounter Act was passed, with the parents and sister of the deceased woman present at the signing. 3 years after the tragedy, Sharon Rocha published a biographical book dedicated to her daughter and grandson titled In Memory of Laci, A Mother's Story of Love, Loss, and Justice. All money raised from the sale of the publication was donated to charity. The book itself was among the top bestsellers in American nonfiction. Sharon's husband and stepfather Laci passed away in the spring of 2018 from a heart attack, shortly before another court hearing. He was buried next to his beloved stepdaughter and grandson. By the way, Laci's own father passed away in December of that same year. Today, we will visit Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas chic. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2nd, 2015, at 07:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashem Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jamieson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas, where she began working at Smile Zona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. 1 bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 07:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same garage. A few minutes later, a man approaches her, shoots her, and runs to the side, after which he jumps in and black Jeep on the move. The videos were of poor quality and the crime scene itself was not visible on them. It was impossible to identify the assailants, but the vehicle was put on a wanted list. It was decided to place the camera footage, images of the Jeep and the driver in the media. The authorities appealed to the public for help, and it helped. Police were contacted by a man named Jose Luis Ortiz. He reported that the car in the footage belonged to him. But Jose wasn't involved in the shooting and he wasn't driving it. When questioned, Jose explained that on the morning of September 2nd, he was approached by two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez. They asked Jose to repair their car and, in return, to lend them his Jeep until the evening. The man agreed. He also said that later that evening, Brenda called Jose to a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Crystal Cortez, later that evening, drove the Jeep to Jose's house, so the man was quite surprised when his Jeep made the news. When Jose saw his Jeep on the TV program, he asked Brenda about it. She first said that it was a different Jeep on the screen. Then Brenda explained that Crystal had been traveling somewhere on her business and she didn't know about it. Brenda Delgado suggested that Jose not tell anyone anything and to simply repaint the Jeep. She was willing to pay to paint the Jeep. Jose was awaiting a decision on his U.S. citizenship and did not want any trouble with the police. He realized that Brenda had set him up. So Jose went to the police again and testified again. So the police tracked all the movements of the Jeep that day and found the two young women whose names Jose had given them. Brenda Delgado was the first person investigators called in for questioning. The woman told police that she never knew Kendra Hatcher and had never seen her before. When asked where she was on September 2nd at 07:42 p.m., Brenda stated her alibi because she was at Chili's restaurant with Jose. Brenda even provided receipts for the dinner. But how often, and more importantly, what do you keep dinner receipts for? So gradually, assembled in minute detail, the truth that the participants in the crime tried to hide was revealed. The central figure in the investigation was Brenda Delgado. She was born into a fairly simple family, Luis and Maria Delgado, who immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father was a factory worker. They found a home in a low-income neighborhood in southeast Dallas. It was then that Luis found a job in construction, and his wife worked at the U.S. Post Office cleaning houses. Brenda was their second child and their only girl. Not only was she an excellent student who was loved by her teachers, but she also worked part-time at a flower store and as a waitress. Brenda was very ambitious and dreamed of going to medical school someday. But the sad reality was that her parents couldn't afford the expensive tuition. So after graduating from Skyline High School in 2000, she continued to live with her parents, only dreaming of an affluent and beautiful life. On the way to her goal, Brenda worked hard. She was a dental assistant, and alongside that, she worked at a day spa in North Park Center where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, Brenda met Ricardo Paniagua and fell in love with him. Their first date was at a Jennifer Lopez concert and was like her dream date. In November 2012, 3 months after they met, Brenda moved in with Ricardo at his home in Fitzhugh Urban Flats. The man was also charmed by Brenda so much that he even met her parents. In 2013, she uploaded a post in honor of his birthday on Facebook where she wrote words of congratulations. "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together we have shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you." Brenda then found out she was pregnant, but at Ricardo's insistence, she terminated the pregnancy, which left her heartbroken. A little recovered from the decision, Brenda decides to devote herself to her career and her beloved Ricky. In the fall of the same year, she enrolled in Sanford. At first glance, it seemed that Brenda had gotten over the emotional blow of the breakup. However, this was not the case. Brenda's painful dependence on Ricardo only gained momentum. And when Ricky posted a joint photo on social media with his new lover Kendra, who looked like a photo model, Brenda was up to something terrible. Many who knew her testified that Brenda dreamed of getting rid of Kendra. After obtaining information about Brenda and her personal life, investigators were able to surmise that the offended woman had a motive to get rid of her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend. They dated intermittently from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky and Kendra met. Ricardo was confident that he and Brenda remained friends and saw no problems between Brenda and Kendra. After all, he had been on dates with other women before meeting Kendra. And why would it be meeting Kendra that would turn Brenda's mind? However, the picture of the reconstructed events confirmed how insidious and cruel an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado thought she had devised the perfect plan to win back her former lover and rid him of the superfluous figure, Kendra Hatcher. At first, she established communication with Ricardo, pretending to be his best friend, provided all kinds of support, was interested in how he and Kendra are progressing in their relationship. Secretly, she knew everything about their plans for the future, and Ricardo believed that this is a sincere interest. But it's a shame that men know women so poorly and sometimes blindly trust them. After Ricardo learned that Kendra had died, he shared his grief with Brenda via text message, and she supported her friend in every way possible and offered to do anything for him. Ricky had no way of guessing his ex's true motives. As it turned out, Brenda had been playing her own game for months. She had opened Ricardo's mail and knew about all his plans with Kendra, even where and when they had booked tickets. All of this was infuriating to Brenda. She longed to be rid of Kendra Hatcher, truly believing that she had taken her place. Brenda transferred Ricardo's account to her phone and kept tabs on him. Following Ricky and Kendra practically became her raison d'etre. Brenda became completely dependent on the stalking. She quit her job and devoted all her time to realizing her goals. Over time, a cruel and terrifying plan was born in Brenda's mind: to kill the hated Kendra and take her place beside her lover. For its realization, Brenda addressed to many of her acquaintances with an offer for money to harm Kendra Hatcher. Thus, through mutual acquaintances, she found a single-mother 21-year-old Crystal Cortez, who, because of the big financial problems, just for $500 was ready to help her. At Brenda's behest, Crystal found the perpetrator, a man named Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Crystal handed Christopher $500 from Brenda, as well as 2 types of illegal substances. Several 2 women followed Kendra to learn her habits and daily schedule, to further select the location and time of the crime. On September 2, 2015, they took Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher Love waited for Kendra in the parking lot. They did not pursue her on her way home from work because they were afraid of falling behind her in traffic. In the evening, the criminals completed their devious plan and were rewarded for a job well done. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were apprehended. The suspects denied their guilt and their presence at the scene of the crime. However, the situation changed when Love was found to have the gun that killed Kendra in the side compartment of the car. Crystal, on the other hand, was nervous and constantly confused in her testimony, telling different stories about the reasons for the appearance of the SUV in different parts of the city. So, at the first interrogation, Crystal admitted that she was the woman who was driving in the parking lot, but she arrived there at the will of an armed carjacker who got into the SUV and forced her into the parking lot that evening. She, wishing to remain innocent, gave false testimony, saying that her son was in the car with her. But this information was later not confirmed because no child was recorded on the cameras. As the interrogation continued and more evidence became available, Crystal changed her testimony and wanted to make a deal with the investigation. She agreed to testify and testify against Brenda in exchange for less time. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the crime was her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting with Brenda, they began planning the crime. The police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricardo was over. She was obsessed and desperate to win him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy to be his loyal friend, but her life began to fall apart. She began to resent Kendra, believing that she had taken her place. According to Crystal, it was at this point that Brenda decided that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. The perfect crime plan emerged in Brenda Delgado's mind. In testimony, Crystal detailed how Brenda devised the perfect crime. Enlisting each other's support, Brenda and Crystal began to formulate a plan to kill Kendra. They met many times and developed many plans. The original plan was to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then get rid of her. But to avoid being under suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around the scraggliest neighborhoods and asked a few people if they could help. That's how they met Christopher Love. He agreed to help and took an active part in deciding the modus operandi of the crime. The trio unanimously decided that the best way to kill was to shoot him because it was quick. While cooperating, Crystal revealed that the date of September 2nd was not chosen at random. Brenda knew that Kendra and Ricardo were planning a trip to Mexico, so it was decided to get rid of the woman before the happy vacation. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the crime to look like a botched robbery. Next, the criminals chose the location of the massacre. For days, they desperately tracked Kendra's movements and recorded her minute by minute to make sure nothing changed on the appointed day. After work, they traced her route home and figured out how to discreetly enter the apartment complex's secure parking garage. On September 1st, 2015, they made a final check. On the day of the crime, early in the morning, Brenda and Crystal picked up the Jeep from Jose, then picked up Christopher along the way. Brenda was dropped off at the library in Carrollton so she would have an alibi, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex. They waited across the street for about 30 minutes, then drove to Kendra's place of employment. After waiting for their victim, they followed her but lost her in traffic, however. They returned to the house first and waited there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves, approached Kendra with a gun, and shot her when she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she did not actually see the shooting but heard it. Crystal then drove Christopher home, picked up her son from his grandmother on the way, and later met Brenda at Jose's house where she handed him the Jeep. Thus, Brenda's dream came true. She was rid of her hated rival, and all she had to do was wait for her beloved Ricardo's message. Brenda was happy that she had managed to pull off the perfect crime. Crystal's candid confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about Brenda Delgado's guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. But when police officers arrived with the warrant, she was no longer at home. Having dual citizenship, Brenda Delgado fled to Mexico. After fleeing, Brenda's involvement in a contract killing became apparent, and she was put on a wanted list. On April 6, 2016, the FBI placed her on the list of most wanted fugitives, assigning a reward of $100,000 for information about her. So Brenda Delgado became the only woman on the list at the time and the 9th woman on the list ever. But just 2 days later, in Torreon, Coahuila, she was apprehended by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States on October 6th. Mexico agreed to extradite Brenda, but only on the grounds that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Brenda was extradited to Texas, and she was brought to trial. Hearings in the case began in 2017. The grief-stricken relatives of Kendra and Ricardo did not hesitate to express themselves during the court appearance. The oil was added to the fire by witnesses who confirmed Brenda's intentions and her dangerous obsession with her former lover. Brenda's cousin, Moses Martinez, spoke in court about his sister's depression after the end of her and Ricky's relationship. He also revealed that Brenda offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He refused to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified at trial that Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo and read all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer revealed that Brenda had asked her to help eliminate the hated Kendra Hatcher too. She also told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something lethal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. For her help, Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car, and illegal drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then refused. It is quite strange that adults, having been offered the suggestion to harm or kill someone, contemplated doing so, and none of them went to the police to report a threat to a person's life or health. The court heard evidence about obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. So the court found that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, and she wanted only one thing: to get back to Ricky. The court received corroboration that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda became increasingly obsessed. As evidence of Brenda's involvement, an ATM withdrawal receipt in the amount of $500, which she subsequently gave to Crystal for doing the work, was presented at the hearing. Christopher Love received a cash payment in the amount of $600. The cell phone data provided also indicated that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together prior to the crime. More than 99 calls were recorded between Brenda and Crystal between August 22 and September 4th, proving their constant communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. The defendant's attorney tried to shift much of the blame to the perpetrators, but it didn't work. The defense argued that Brenda was not at the scene of the crime. She had an alibi and receipts confirming her presence at the restaurant at the time of the crime. Brenda herself did not plead guilty, but the jury thought otherwise. It took them only 30 minutes to find Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Christopher Love, the direct perpetrator of the crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death via injection. Crystal Cortez, in exchange for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty, received a sentence of 35 years in prison with parole eligibility. The family of Kendra Hatcher was satisfied with the court's decision and silently withdrew from the courtroom after the verdict. The Delgado family did not believe to the last that their Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving daughter and woman, healthy and with good family and Christian values. I hope this cautionary tale of female perfidy and mentally unhealthy obsessive love will leave a mark on every woman's soul and serve as a cautionary tale in new love relationships For no man is worth a human life. Take care of yourself and be careful. Who organized a bloodbath in a quiet town? Almost any crime in a small, quiet town where everyone knows each other becomes a high-profile event that will be discussed for a long time. But if it is a brutal crime against an entire family, which has never happened before in these parts, then such stories very quickly grow all sorts of rumors, speculation, fictional gruesome details, and eventually turn into a real urban legend. In the fall of 2010, the small Australian town of Kapunda, with a population of only 3,000 people, located on the Light River, near the Barossa Valley in South Australia, was shaken by the horrific news of the massacre of an entire family. Local law enforcers had never encountered anything like this before, and therefore found themselves in a state of confusion. Rumors immediately spread around the city. Everyone retold the story in their own way, so that the police even had to partially classify the case so as not to leak information and not to sow more panic. The dead family was well known and respected in the city. They had no enemies and ill-wishers, as it seemed to everyone at that time, and there was no motive for the crime at first glance either. What happened looked like a senseless bloodbath, and detectives even suggested that it was the work of some madman or maniac. It is noteworthy that the real culprit was not even initially included in the number of suspects, and probably would have been able to get away with it if he had not accidentally given himself away. The story of the Rowe family. The head of the family, Andrew Rowe, was a native of England, where he was born in 1965. At the age of 3, he and his parents emigrated to Australia, where they decided to stay forever. The family settled in the suburbs of Adelaide, where the boy went to school. He from an early age was sociable, had a great sense of humor, and had a lot of friends, and also loved fishing with his father. After graduating from high school while studying in the capital of South Australia, Adelaide, a young man met the same cheerful girl named Rose, who was only a year younger than him. Between students quickly began a romantic relationship, and in 1985, they married, playing a modest wedding, which was attended only by their closest people. In 1987, the couple had their first child together, a boy, whom the happy young parents named Christopher, and in 1994 their daughter Chantel was born. The family settled in a quiet and cozy town, Kapunda, where they opened their own small business, founding a company that provided professional carpet cleaning services. Their business quickly took off, and the business brought in a good income, allowing the Rowe to do nothing to deny themselves. The children attended one of the local schools, where they studied well, and in high school began to work part-time, striving for self-sufficiency and financial independence. The eldest son was interested in music and practiced guitar, while the youngest daughter painted well, attended a dance studio, and played on the school basketball team. Chantel was described as a very kind, sympathetic girl, always ready to come to the aid of those who were in trouble. She dreamed of getting a law degree and becoming a lawyer, and her brother decided to connect his fate with programming and computer technologies. The children were very close to their parents, and in general their family was friendly, strong, and happy. In the summer of 2010, 23-year-old Christopher moved out of his parents' home and began living with his girlfriend in the same city, just a few blocks away from his family. And in late September of the same year, Chantel got a part-time job at a roadside cafe as a waitress. It was inconvenient for her to get to the workplace, so her father or brother drove her there. Since the girl was already 16 years old, she dreamed of passing her driver's license as soon as possible to drive a car, but these dreams, alas, were not destined to come true. On November 4th, 2010, Christopher, together with his girlfriend, went on vacation to Brisbane, and soon after returning, young people planned to play a wedding. But on the 8th, after the young man was unable to reach any of his family members, he became very concerned. Chris called his father's office, and after learning that he did not go to work for an unknown reason and did not answer the phone, he realized that something bad had happened. So he called his friend and asked him to go to their house to see if everything was okay. A brutal massacre of a family. On November 8th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a patrol car pulled up to the Rowe family home. It is worth noting that at the time, the small-town police station had only 2 people working, and when they realized that they were dealing with a brutal triple crime, they immediately requested help from the administrative center. The picture of the crime was so shocking that even the experienced detectives who came from Adelaide said they had never encountered anything like it. The house inside looked like the set of a horror movie. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, walls, furniture, curtains, and even the ceiling. The breathless and badly disfigured bodies of 45-year-old Andrew and 44-year-old Rose lay in the kitchen, while Chantel's torn body lay on the bed in her room. All members of the family had suffered dozens of penetrating stab wounds and had died long before police and paramedics arrived. Almost immediately, suspicions arose that the crime was of a personal nature because nothing was missing from the house, nothing was searched, and valuable things, phones, laptop, expensive camera, and even money were lying in prominent places. It was also suggested that the killer was not alone, because it is not easy to cope with 3 adults. Either it was a tall, sturdy, and physically strong man. The detectives noticed that in some places the footprints had been ineptly washed and wiped, which led them to conclude that the perpetrator had attempted to hide the evidence, but soon gave up and abandoned the idea. There were also clear, bloody shoe prints on the floor, heading towards the door, but suddenly breaking off, which could indicate that the perpetrator had taken off his shoes and left in socks. Another curious point is that there were no signs of forced entry. This could indicate that the victims either knew their perpetrator and let him into the house themselves, or he got in by some other means. The family, by all accounts, had no enemies or ill-wishers, and no one could even guess who and why the parents and daughter had been so brutally murdered. Several clear fingerprints were found on the door in the room of the murdered girl, but checking them against the police database yielded nothing. The person who left them had never previously come to the attention of law enforcers. He either did not commit offenses or went unpunished. The house was cordoned off as a crime scene, and the area was fenced off from prying eyes, as well as from the press representatives who arrived here. Almost immediately, it was decided not to disclose details and not to spread the word about the investigation, so as not to scare the criminal and not let him lie low or escape. Nevertheless, rumors about the maniac quickly spread through the city. People became afraid to go out in the street at night and locked their houses with all the locks and bolts. First suspects. As wild as it may sound, the first suspect was the only surviving family member, Christopher. At the time of the tragedy, he was in Queensland, where he was vacationing with his fiancée in Moreton Bay on the Pacific coast. He was the first to sound the alarm when he discovered that his loved ones were out of contact, and took the first flight home when he learned the shocking news, but his alibi and fingerprints were checked first. However, he was immediately ruled out as a suspect, as he was indeed on the other side of the continent at the time of the crime. A curious fact was that the young girl, the perpetrator after the massacre, changed into clean clothes and laid on the bed. At the same time, there were bloody drag marks near the bed, which indicated that Chantel probably tried to hide from her executioner under the bed, but he pulled her out of there. In addition, forensic experts soon determined that she had been abused before her death. As noted earlier, it looked like the crime was very personal, and the perpetrator clearly had a grudge against the victims, hence such senseless cruelty. The head of the family received 36 stab wounds, and his wife was stabbed 50 times all over her body. And judging by the traces, she was attacked twice. But after the first attack, she managed to survive, and she even tried to call for help. On the body of the girl, forensic experts counted 33 stab wounds. In addition, she was abused. The police immediately began to find out whether the deceased was in a relationship, whether she was dating someone, and whether she had obsessive fans. It soon became known that the girl had been dating a guy named Dylan for about a year, with whom they went to the same school. The young man was also 16 years old, and the detectives doubted that such a brutal crime could have been committed by this young guy. Nevertheless, They needed to talk to him, check his alibi, and get his opinion as to who might have wanted to harm his girlfriend and her loved ones. Dylan willingly agreed to cooperate with the police and told them everything he knew. According to him, he and Chantel had a wonderful relationship. They loved each other and were going to get married as soon as they became adults. The death of his beloved girl was a huge shock for him, and he simply did not know how to live on. At the time of the massacre of the Rowe family, the guy was in a neighboring city on the anniversary of his grandfather, and his alibi could confirm dozens of people. The young man has also been ruled out as a suspect, searching for evidence and witnesses, so the police had fingerprints of the criminal, as well as his seminal fluid found on the body of the deceased Chantel, from which they managed to extract DNA, but it also did not appear in the police database. Notably, the family was massacred with carving knives that the perpetrator removed from a stand in their own kitchen. This could indicate that the crime was not planned in advance and could have been spontaneous. The murder weapons themselves could not be found at the scene, so the murderer took them with him when he left. Experts determined that the victims were killed between midnight and 2 a.m. One of Rowe's neighbors admitted that around 1 a.m. he heard Rose call for help twice, and then there was a thud, as if something heavy had fallen, and then everything went quiet. He thought it was strange, but he did not call the police, deciding that it was just a simple domestic quarrel between the couple, and he should not interfere in their family affairs. No strangers were seen near their house that evening. Police officers were carefully combing the area around the house looking for evidence or instruments of crime. It was also decided to reach out to the residents of the town through the media and encourage them to share any information that could help the investigation move forward in the case. But this approach rather made the detectives' job more difficult. Almost immediately, the police began to receive dozens of calls from concerned people who wanted to help, and all the information received had to be verified. Callers reported suspicious people, cars, tried to connect what happened with a gang of bikers, with drug dealers, and even reported suspicious posts on social networks found in the profiles of local residents. However, all the incoming information did not help law enforcement officers. 2 days before the tragedy, among the things in the house was found an expensive camera that belonged to the dead girl. As it turned out, Chantel was fond of photography, and detectives assumed that there may be pictures that would help the investigation. There were indeed many photos on the memory card, but the last ones interested the police most of all. It turned out that 2 days before the tragedy, on November 6th, in the house of Rowe was a friendly party, which was organized by Chantel. Her parents that day left with a sleepover to relatives, and she decided to take advantage of their absence. But it should be noted that it wasn't some kind of party with alcohol or something worse, but quite decent and quiet, sitting over watching movies and cooking dinner on the barbecue. Chantel had only invited her boyfriend and 3 of her best friends with their other halves, so there were only 8 people in the house. That evening, the hostess of the house took a lot of pictures that captured their good time. Some of the photos of the guests present that same evening published on their pages in social networks, noting friends there. All the friends stayed the night at the house Rowe, and returned in the morning. Andrew and Rose even cooked breakfast for the guests, having a sit-down in the backyard. Detectives decided that it was necessary to interview all the people who were present at that party, to find out whether the girl had enemies, envious or stalkers, as well as to take everyone's fingerprints to compare with the samples found on the door of the room of the deceased. Chantel's friends still couldn't believe what had happened. They tried their best to help the investigation and showed up at the station to testify at the first call. The boys provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, but they did not match those found at the crime scene. They also allowed access to their social media pages and phones, and they also detailed all the events that took place at what turned out to be the last party. Dylan recalled that on Sunday, his girlfriend complained that she was not feeling well and probably had a cold. In the evening, she had developed a fever and realized that she couldn't go to work the next day, so she had called her boss and warned him about it. The next morning, around 5 o'clock, the guy texted her and asked how she was feeling. He saw the message light up as read, but Chantel never responded. The The guy did not know that at that time his beloved and her parents were already dead, and the message was read by the criminal. Moreover, the police found out that the criminal even tried to write a reply text message, but since Chantel forgot to recharge her account, the message never went away. Nevertheless, the perpetrator tried to create the illusion that young Roe was still alive. Unexpected suspect. Dylan and several close friends of the deceased helped police officers compile a list of all the people in Chantel's entourage with whom she had been in contact. Law enforcement began working their way down that list, talking to and checking out everyone listed there. After about a week, they reached a certain 18-year-old young man named Jason Downey. He had previously attended the same high school as the deceased and her boyfriend, but had graduated last year and was now working at a local auto repair shop. Initially, Jason didn't raise any suspicions at all. He was of average height, very thin, even skinny, and looked completely harmless. They planned to just interrogate him and let him go, but the young man began to behave strangely. Instead of answering the standard questions asked, he started complaining that Chantel didn't invite him to her party because everyone there was in pairs, and he didn't have a girlfriend. And afterward, he claimed that he had an alibi for the night of the crime, although no one had even asked him about it. The behavior of the guy seemed very suspicious to the law enforcers, and therefore it was decided to check him to the fullest extent, including fingerprinting and taking a DNA sample. Hearing about this, Downey did not show any excitement or concern and simply agreed to undergo all the necessary procedures. At this point, the police again doubted his guilt, but still decided to follow through with the test. When the expert took the guy's fingerprints, he noticed relatively fresh, deep cuts on his palms. Jason explained that he had hurt himself on the job at the machine shop, but all the cuts looked smooth, as if they had been made with a thin, sharp tool. The test results showed that it was Downey's prints that were found on the dead woman's bedroom door. For the full picture, all we had to do was wait for the DNA test results, which were due in 2 days. In the meantime, they decided to talk to the guy again and ask him how his fingerprints ended up in the house of the deceased if he had not been present at the party the night before. The suspect again looked perfectly calm and explained that he had visited Roe's house with Dylan about a month and a half ago and had probably left fingerprints there. But this version did not correspond to reality because the prints were fresh and clear. They were not dusty. They were not smudged or rubbed, which would have happened to them over such a long period of time. And on November 16, 2010, the DNA results came back from the lab, dispelling any last doubts. It was Jason who had abused the girl that night and taken her life as well as that of her parents. But why would he do that to her? And where did this scrawny young man get his strength and rage? He was arrested the same day, and now the detectives had to find out what moved this man and what was the motive for such a brutal massacre of the family. Who is Jason Downey? Jason Downey was born in September 1992 in the Scottish town of Kilmarnock, where he spent his childhood and early adolescence. He was the youngest of 2 children in the family and was raised with his own older brother, Jamie. His parents divorced when the boy was only 8 months old, and from then on he was raised by his mother, Lorraine. His father soon remarried, and the brothers had a half-sister, Judy, with whom, however, they practically did not communicate. When Jason was 13 years old, they emigrated with his mother and brother to Australia and settled in the town of Kapunda. In the new place, the woman married for the second time to a local resident, whom she had previously met through the internet. The boy, who grew up in a big city, did not like it here at all. He literally hated provincial life and dreamed of getting out of here. Jason had almost no friends at school. He was considered strange, and they talked to him more out of pity. He was overly talkative, self-assured, and constantly lied, telling everyone what a talented athlete he was, how popular he was, and how many admirers he had. In reality, girls ignored him. No one wanted to get involved with this odd and ugly young man. Dylan and Jason played on the same basketball team, and Dylan felt sorry for Jason because almost no one wanted to be friends with him. He started inviting him to various friendly gatherings,
and even introduced him to his girlfriend Chantel, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. Chantel also communicated with Downey out of politeness and pity because he was a friend of her boyfriend, and she also a couple of times stood up for him in front of other teenagers who tried to insult him. However, her desire to help a hurt and hounded boy led Jason to fall madly in love with her. Moreover, he began to think that she has the same feelings for him, but because of Dylan cannot say it openly. Over time, teenage crush transformed into a real obsession, but others did not notice it, as Downey became more and more immersed in his fantasies, in which he was happy with Chantel. The girl never gave him hope or made any ambiguous hints, but only tried to be polite and friendly. She just happened to be the only one who was kind to him, and he mistook it for love. The arrest and the first interrogation. When the last doubts that Jason had committed the triple crime were dispelled, the law enforcers realized that the arrest could not be delayed, but they did not know how best to do it because they were afraid that the guy might not have done something. Everyone knew exactly what he was capable of, so they decided to lure him to the station under a harmless pretext. As soon as the suspect arrived, handcuffs were snapped on his wrists. Surprisingly, the guy showed no emotion at all. He wasn't surprised, scared, or angry. He was completely calm. Downey denied all the accusations and tried his best to get out of it. He insisted that he left his fingerprints when he visited the house a month and a half ago. And when the guy was asked how his DNA ended up on the body and inside the deceased, he said that at the same time during his visit, they had consensual intimacy. Of course, this could not be true, because seminal fluid could not have remained on the body for so long, neither inside nor outside. As for the suspect's alibi, he stated that he had an argument with his mother and stepfather in the evening, after which he went to sleep in the car. The parents confirmed the fact of the quarrel, but no one knew where Jason went afterward. The police also managed to find out that in the evening, November 7th, he called Dylan, from whom he learned that Chantel was sick and would stay home on Monday. Apparently, it was after this conversation that he decided to go to Rose's house. Around the same time, police were able to locate a pair of shoes discarded in a deserted area with traces of blood on them. The sole prints matched the marks at the crime scene. The shoes showed traces of blood from all three victims, and inside were Downey's own sweat, reconstructing the timeline of events. When Jason realized that the evidence against him is too much and it is useless to defend himself, he decided to confess to the murder and agreed to cooperate with the investigation in order to avoid the most severe punishment. However, he tried to minimize his guilt in every possible way. He even promised to show the place where he threw the crime tools, but there were no knives there. Most likely the guy was just lying. That evening he really quarreled with his mother and stepfather, after which he left home, intending to spend the night in the car. However, after a phone conversation with Dylan, Jason became obsessed with seeing Chantel. Initially, he planned to just drive up to her house and stare blankly through the windows, as he had done so many times before, but it was dark indoors. Then the guy drove the car to the end of the street, returned back on foot, and sneaked into the house through a small window in the bathroom, which the owners left open. As he was very thin, he succeeded without difficulty. He sat in the bathroom for about half an hour, listening to the sounds to make sure everyone had gone to bed. The suspect then headed to Chantel's bedroom to, he said, confess his feelings to her. But why he took the knife from the kitchen with him if he was going to confess his love, the guy could not explain. According to the police, Jason initially planned to abuse the object of his lust by threatening her with a knife, but she naturally resisted. During the attack, he wounded her several times, and the victim tried to hide from her tormentor under the bed. Her parents woke up from the noise, but they did not have time to get to their daughter's room as the perpetrator jumped out in front of them. The guy was literally mad at the sight of blood. He attacked Andrew, quickly stabbing him in the neck and chest area. Then he knocked Rose to the ground and stabbed her 12 times until the woman lost consciousness. Downey then returned to Chantel's room, pulled her out from under the bed, took, 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 Why he changed his victim into clean clothes, he was never able to explain. In the meantime, the miraculously surviving woman managed to get to the back door and even managed to call for help twice before the perpetrator caught up with her and finished her off with a second knife, which he snatched from the same stand. After massacring the family, the guy made an attempt to clean up the house, but quickly abandoned the idea because there was too much blood. He realized that he had made a mess, so he took off his bloody shoes and left the scene in just his socks. He took the knives with him and disposed of them in such a way that they were never found. Trial and sentencing. Jason's trial began only in the fall of 2011, almost a year after his crime. At the trial, the guy behaved absolutely calmly, did not express any emotions, but constantly changed his testimony. He claimed that he was in shock, that he did not remember killing the Rowe family, and kept repeating that he loved Chantel and did not want to hurt her. It is noteworthy that after the massacre, he took with him the victim's pendant, which was later found in his room during a search, and the chain from the pendant was in the glove compartment of his car. At trial, he recounted again that Chantel had not invited him to a party she had thrown at her house the night before because he did not have a date. Allegedly, he was very upset that he had been ignored and noted that the tragedy might not have happened if Chantel had called him then. The defendant testified with a completely impartial face, and in a phone conversation he told his brother that he pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence. That is, Jason was not remorseful at all, but only wanted to receive a lighter sentence. However, he managed to get his way. On April 19, 2012, Downey was found guilty of a triple crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of qualifying for parole after 35 years. During the announcement of the sentence, not a single muscle on his face did not tremble. He remained as calm and impartial as if it was not about him, but about someone else. If he had not pleaded guilty, he would have been eligible for release after 45 years. Christopher Rowe considered the punishment just, although he noted that no court could take away his pain and bring his family back to life. In memory of his parents and sister, he made tattoos with their names. Finally, I would like to add that Christopher is currently married, and together with his wife, they are raising their son, Kobe. Breaking off relationships almost always leaves emotional scars and turmoil which do not heal quickly. People handle such situations differently. Some prefer to never see or speak to each other again to avoid reopening fresh wounds, while others remain friends. However, there are instances where ex-lovers are no longer together, but also unable to completely separate due to something shared that cannot be quickly dissolved. In situations where former lovers start new relationships in each other's presence and continue to interact, it can lead to unpredictable outcomes. The story of Ildiko Krajniak, a successful entrepreneur and owner of a high-end spa salon in California, resembled a fairy tale but ended abruptly and tragically. Initially, there were suggestions of an accident, an attack, or rival machinations, but the truth turned out to be far grimmer. A devastating event befell the successful and attractive woman at the hands of someone she once loved and trusted immensely. Who is Ildiko Krajniak? Childhood, early years. A girl named Ildiko Krajniak was born on June 8, 1969, in the city of Miskolc in northeastern Hungary, and was the younger of two children in a middle-class family. Her mother, Juliana, worked as a nurse in the Department of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, but later, in the 1980s, retrained in aesthetic medicine, which was becoming increasingly popular, and opened her own clinic. The family patriarch, Laszlo Krajniak, was a simple worker and spent most of his life laboring at a local factory, striving to provide for his family. Ildiko's elder brother, named after their father, was only a few years older than her. From early childhood, the siblings got along well and were nearly inseparable. Following in their father's footsteps, her brother gained an engineering degree and worked at the same machine-building plant for a while before starting his own small business in their hometown. Ildiko was naturally creative and imaginative from childhood, feeling constrained not only in Miskolc, but also in conservative Hungary. She dreamed of traveling the world, seeing other cities and countries, establishing her business, achieving success and recognition, and breaking free from the ordinariness in which her family lived. After finishing school, young Krasniak enrolled in a medical college and later obtained a license to work in aesthetic cosmetology. Inspired by her mother's example, she aimed to achieve more and become a true star in her field. Her first success came when she was just 20 years old. The budding specialist skillfully built her career, independently developing a business plan and strategy. She quickly built up a client base and started earning decent money by her city's standards. Ildiko constantly strived to learn and improve her skills, staying up to date with all the latest innovations in cosmetology, aesthetic medicine, and the beauty industry at large. However, she understood that her opportunities at home were limited and that, as a specialist, she would soon reach their ceiling. To move forward, she would need to find a place that offered more chances to fully realize her potential. After earning a bachelor's degree in medical aesthetics, the ambitious young Krasniak decided to take action. Moving to the USA, the ambitions of this young woman were enviable, though few believed she would truly embark on such radical changes, as Ildiko was very close to her family and seemed unlikely to ever leave her parents. However, in the summer of 1992, shortly after celebrating her 23rd birthday, Ildiko decided to realize her lifelong dream and moved across the ocean to the United States of America. Chasing the American dream, the determined Hungarian gambled everything and took the risk. It was not just a move, but a desire to completely change her life. She gathered all the money she had saved, bought a one-way plane ticket, and set off for another continent. There, she had no relatives, no friends, nor acquaintances. Nobody was waiting for her, and she barely knew any English, but she took that step into the unknown. Her parents had mixed feelings about their daughter's decision, but no one tried to stop her since she was already an adult and could make such serious decisions independently. Nevertheless, her relatives were very concerned about how her life would unfold in a foreign land. Ildiko decided to head straight to sunny California, where she planned to look for a job, learn the language, and, so to speak, put down roots. The move was a real culture shock for her. After living in conservative, prim, and cold Hungary, America indeed seemed like a fairy tale, and a place where all dreams come true. Initially, the young woman stayed in a budget hostel, trying to save money since she still had to find a job, which was not easy without knowing the language. However, luck soon smiled on her, and she was hired as an assistant to a master stylist in one of the local beauty salons. The salary allowed her to rent a decent apartment and provide for her basic needs, but to work in the field of cosmetology and aesthetic medicine, Krasniak needed to master the language well and obtain the appropriate medical license in the US. With no connections or acquaintances, Ildiko could only rely on her own strength. She worked diligently, dedicating all her free time to learning English and improving her communication skills. Her perseverance and hard work soon paid off. She successfully passed the required exams and obtained a license allowing her to work in cosmetology, leading specialist. Just a couple of years after moving, Ildiko became the leading specialist at a spa center in an elite 5-star hotel frequented by show business stars and other celebrities. She earned a reputation as the best cosmetologist in town, with bookings made months in advance. Additionally, as a professional, she constantly educated herself and advanced her qualifications. She attended international exhibitions and seminars, had an excellent understanding of the compositions of cosmetic products and treatments, and easily helped clients resolve almost any aesthetic skin issues. Beyond her professional skills, the young woman possessed superb diplomatic qualities. She easily and effortlessly made useful contacts and influential friends, quickly established relationships with business partners, and had a natural business acumen. Krasniak was not content to always work for others and dreamed of opening her own salon, which would be the best not only in the city, but throughout the state of California. By the mid-90s, the young Hungarian had become the most sought-after specialist at the center where she worked. Clients who had once visited her for treatment subsequently tried to book appointments only with this cosmetologist. Ildiko already understood that the client base she had built would stay with her, even if she changed her place of work.
The management of the spa complex knew this too, and therefore did everything possible to retain the specialist by creating the most favorable working conditions. Family life. Krajniak was open, friendly, sociable, and very beautiful, naturally attracting a lot of male attention and having many admirers. However, during her first years in the United States, she was more focused on learning the language, professional growth, and career advancement, pushing her personal life to not just a back burner, but perhaps to the fifth priority. In 1995, she met a young man named Ramilo Vestal who had Asian roots and had immigrated to America with his family as a schoolboy. He had pursued a medical education and was working as a doctor at a local hospital. The couple quickly found a common language, and romantic feelings developed between them. A year after meeting in the spring of 1996, they had a modest wedding attended only by their closest people. 2 years later, the couple welcomed their only child together, a son they named Keanu. The new parents adored their child, spending all their free time with family. Their home was filled with love and understanding, and everyone who knew them noted how harmoniously they complemented each other and how they radiated happiness when together. In the mid-90s, Ildiko convinced her cousin to also move to the United States, and she decided to relocate with her husband and children. The relatives settled near her home. They communicated closely, regularly visited each other, and their families became close friends. In 2000, after a long illness, Krajniak's father passed away, which was a severe blow to the family. By that time, her elder brother Laszlo was already married, raising children, and living in another city, leaving their mother Juliana alone in the family home, suffering from severe depression. Additionally, she began showing signs of dementia, making it unsafe to leave her alone. Ildiko decided to bring her mother to California so that the elderly woman wouldn't feel lonely and could spend her final years surrounded by family. For Juliana, moving to America was also a challenging step, but her daughter helped her adapt, surrounding her with love and care. Moreover, the grandmother was overjoyed to have the chance to dote on her grandson Keanu, whom she had previously only seen in photographs, own business. In 2002, Krajniak finally decided to open her own salon. By then, she had accumulated enough funds, gained business experience, and built an extensive client base. Supported by her loved ones, the young woman dared to risk everything. Ildiko established her spa salon in Aliso Viejo, California, located in the San Joaquin Hills of southern Orange County. She named it Magyar Kozmetika, which translates to Hungarian cosmetics. Soon, her establishment earned a 5-star rating, and its fame spread throughout the state. In her work, Ildiko used only premium quality cosmetics, treatments, and equipment. She earned a reputation as one of the best cosmetologists, and she took great pride in this. The woman skillfully managed and developed her business, and she had chosen an excellent location for her salon. Her establishment was located in a major business center in Southern California, 10 miles from the popular Laguna Beach and about 70 miles from Los Angeles. For many years, the cosmetologist successfully developed her business, with her income steadily increasing. By the late 2000s, she and her husband had bought a luxurious large house where they moved with their son and Krajniak's mother. The woman had her own driver and household assistants, could afford anything she desired, and lived the life she had always dreamed of. Moreover, it is worth noting that Ildiko herself was a living advertisement for her salon. She always looked stunning and seemed not to age at all. She also continuously enhanced her qualifications, obtained an international medical certificate, and could practice in virtually any country. Over time, the cosmetologist also began to conduct training seminars and courses for professionals in the field. For many years, Krajniak engaged in her beloved work, striving to be the best. She developed business strategies, researched the market to stay competitive, found reliable suppliers, and devised advertising campaigns. And all this did not prevent her from continuing to personally see clients who sought her services specifically. For her only beloved child, the woman paid for education in an elite private school, music lessons with the best teachers, and language courses. From her experience, she knew how important it was to master several foreign languages and how useful this could be in life. In 2016, Keanu became a student at a prestigious university and went to study in Washington. Crisis and the Last Vacation. The year 2017 started off as an exceptionally tough one for Ildiko. The business center, which had housed her spa salon for over 15 years, suddenly changed ownership. The new owner quickly made it clear that he had his own plans for the building in a prestigious area, and thus the leases with the tenants were swiftly terminated. Ildiko was not prepared for such a turn of events and had to immediately look for a new location to relocate. For Krajniak, the situation was a major stressor. She faced colossal losses and tried to find a suitable place close to the old one. She stayed in Aliso Viejo but moved from the luxurious business center to a 2-story commercial building, occupying half of the first floor. The move itself also amounted to a significant expense, as it involved transporting a large amount of expensive equipment that required careful handling. Additionally, the new location needed some cosmetic repairs before it could be operational. In March 2018, when the main work was completed and the spa salon reopened at the new location, a work-weary and stressed Ildiko decided to take a small vacation. She flew to Portugal for 2 weeks, relaxing under the warm sun at a popular beach resort. It seemed that the difficulties were behind her, and she was quick to make up for lost time. A month later, Laszlo flew to California to visit his sister and elderly mother. They communicated well, spent quality time together, and even took a family trip to Washington to surprise Keanu at university. On May 5th, Ildiko and her brother flew to their native Hungary. The man was returning home to his family, while for Ildiko, it was a business trip which he decided to combine with a visit to relatives she had not seen in a long time. She returned home with innovative treatments that provided stunning, rejuvenating effects, eager to put them to use. Unfortunately, less than a week later, the salon into which she had poured her soul was destroyed, and she herself was found dead. Accident, attack, or planned crime. On May 15, 2018, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the emergency services received consecutive reports of a powerful explosion and fire in the commercial center housing Ildiko's spa salon. The blast was heard several blocks away, and frightened people speculated that it could have been an attack, fearing it might be the first in a series. Across the street from the destroyed building was a daycare, and parents, upon hearing what had happened, rushed there to ensure their children were safe. Fire trucks, ambulances, and several police patrols were immediately dispatched to the scene. The building itself was partially destroyed. Flames engulfed the interior, and the street was littered with debris from bricks, glass shards, and roofing fragments. At that time, it was unclear how many people were inside at the time of the explosion and whether there were any fatalities or injuries. Witnesses reported a loud bang and acrid smoke that quickly spread through the street, triggering car alarms in the vicinity. As rescuers moved closer to the epicenter of the explosion, the scene became increasingly horrific. Blood was everywhere inside, and under the debris and broken furniture, 2 injured people were found. Later, it was discovered they were a mother and daughter who had come for treatments at the spa on that fateful day. The women were concussed, lacerated by shards, and had severe burns. They were knocked unconscious by the blast wave, but fortunately both were saved. Several other employees and clients sustained minor injuries and smoke inhalation and were taken to the hospital. But the most gruesome discovery awaited the rescuers. Behind the former reception desk, they found disfigured and severely burned human remains. Identification was not immediately possible, but it was soon confirmed to be the 48-year-old spa owner, Ildiko Krajniak, who was at the epicenter. Bomb disposal units were at the scene, as there was no certainty that another explosion would not occur. From the beginning, it was difficult to determine what exactly caused such a destructive blast and what had detonated. The initial theory of a gas leak and electrical short was quickly dismissed, as there was a specific point of explosion. The possibility of a terrorist act was investigated, though no other explosive devices were found in this or neighboring buildings. Another very plausible theory was that of a carefully planned crime against Ildiko. The deceased was a kind and open person, engaged in charity work, and always willing to help others. However,
She was also a successful entrepreneur with many envious rivals and competitors who might have wanted to eliminate her radically. Each theory had to be checked, but first, it was necessary to speak with the victim's relatives and friends, as well as interview the surviving witnesses. At the same time, an emergency call came from a woman named Lori Stone, who could not reach her boyfriend, Stephen Bill. According to her, he was a co-founder of the spa salon and might also have been in the building at the time of the explosion. Eyewitness accounts. The surviving mother and daughter suffered serious injuries, were urgently operated on, and were in intensive care. As soon as their condition stabilized slightly, they agreed to speak with law enforcement and recount everything that happened. On that day, the women were undergoing treatments at Krajniak's spa salon. They had been there before, knew the owner well, and everything was as usual during this visit until they went to the reception desk to pay for their cosmetic services. Ildiko often performed the duties of the receptionist herself and was at the desk at that moment. She was sorting through mail, and there was also a large package on the desk in front of her. She took the payment, issued the receipts to the clients, and then, continuing the casual conversation, took a box cutter and began to open that very box. At that moment, an unexpected, powerful explosion occurred, and everything after seemed like a blur. According to the daughter, she first saw a blinding flash followed by a deafening bang, then felt a wave of heat and realized she was flying through the air. In reality, she was thrown by the blast wave, but miraculously, she remained conscious, managed to find her mother amid the chaos, and dragged her to a destroyed wall for air, after which she lost consciousness and later woke up in the hospital. After speaking with the victims, there was no doubt that this was a premeditated crime, and the explosive device had been disguised as an ordinary package. The next steps were to identify a circle of suspects and determine who might not only wish the woman dead, but also carry it through. It was also unclear whether the target was solely Ildiko, or if her 59-year-old business partner Stephen Bill was also in mortal danger. Police were immediately dispatched to the man's home. Bill had just returned from a business trip and was greeted by a pile of packages at his doorstep. He was moved to a safe distance, and bomb disposal experts checked each box, but they only contained store orders, and no explosives were found. Stephen was questioned, but he appeared shocked by the news of Krajniak's death and could not name anyone who might wish her harm. No longer spouses, just neighbors. The deceased's husband, Ramilo Vestil, arrived at the scene as soon as he heard about the incident. He had hoped until the last moment that his wife might have survived, but upon hearing the tragic news, he was utterly devastated. However, it was also necessary to question him. At this point, a very curious detail emerged that only a few members of the Krajniak family knew. It turned out that Ildiko and Ramilo had long ceased to be a couple in the conventional sense. They continued to live in their shared, large, and luxurious house, had not formalized a divorce, and maintained a warm relationship. But in fact, they had become just neighbors to each other. In recent years, each had their own personal life. They did not feel jealousy towards one another and were ready to let go completely if either of them found true love. This circumstance seemed strange and very suspicious to the police. In the event of his wife's death, Ramilo, still being her legal spouse, would inherit the house, all the property, and the quite profitable business. However, this last aspect argued rather in favor of the man's innocence. Why would he destroy the spa salon, which was the main source of income for their family? Business partner and former lover. It was established that over the past couple of years, the deceased had been involved with at least 5 different men. Most of these were fleeting interests, but 2 names particularly drew the investigators' attention. A close friend of Krajniak revealed that the woman had been seeing a man named Nicholas for a few months, to whom she felt strong emotions, and did not rule out the possibility that their relationship could progress to a new level, even potentially leading to marriage. A week before the tragedy, the couple spent a weekend together in Sacramento, where they flew spontaneously, dropping all other engagements. Detectives quickly located this man and interrogated him, but he was found to have no involvement in the tragedy and was as shocked by the events as anyone else, with no motive to harm the woman he loved. It then emerged that several months earlier, Ildiko had been closely involved with her business partner, Stephen Bill. When investigators looked into how they met and why they became partners, despite Bill having no previous ties to the beauty industry, a quite intriguing story surfaced. About a year and a half ago, when the woman faced serious business problems, was looking for a new location for the salon, and was experiencing significant losses, she met Stephen. He was charmed by her beauty, fell in love at first sight, and agreed to cover all the expenses associated with moving the spa center. He also invested a substantial sum into its development, becoming Krajniak's business partner. At the same time, they began a romantic relationship that lasted about 6 months. It is likely that the woman reciprocated out of gratitude, but she did not truly have deep feelings for Bill. In March 2018, they vacationed together in Portugal, but by that time, Ildiko had already started an affair with Nicholas and was constantly in touch with him by phone, which irritated Stephen. She broke up with him immediately upon returning. The former lovers continued to run the business together, and Bill did not give up trying to win her back, but she was already happy in her new relationship. He even tried to make her jealous by starting a relationship with Laurie Stone, but Krajniak was unaffected by this. She no longer cared. It is likely that Bill harbored resentment towards her and could have sought revenge. Strange hobby and skeletons in the closet. The police decided to take a closer look at Stephen and discovered that he had a rather specific hobby. He was involved in making fireworks and was well versed in pyrotechnics. The man did not deny this and did not obstruct the search of his home. There, officers found professional equipment, materials for creating decorative fireworks and rockets, as well as gunpowder and other combustible chemicals. At that time, the police had no solid reason or evidence to detain Bill, and he was released. However, they decided to investigate his background further and discovered that his wife had died under strange circumstances 10 years ago. Officially, the cause of death was pancreatitis, but it was preceded by a mysterious accident at home while they were moving furniture. It appeared that Stephen had provoked the incident, but nothing could be proven. Furthermore, he received a substantial insurance payout after becoming a widower, which also suggested a motive for murder. Arrest and trial. Several months later, detectives managed to find video surveillance footage from May 10th, showing Bill purchasing a mix of combustible chemical components and parts for making poppers, which were later found at the explosion site. Additionally, it was revealed that early on the morning of the tragedy, he visited the spa salon to leave the deadly package. He entered through the back door using his key and parked his car on a nearby street to remain unnoticed. On March 3, 2019, Stephen Bill was arrested on charges of premeditated murder, use of a weapon of mass destruction, and intentional destruction of a building. During the trial, several more charges were added, related to causing serious bodily harm. One of the women injured in the explosion lost an eye, while another suffered deep burns to her face and body. Although Bill pleaded not guilty, the evidence and testimonies collected were not in his favor. Moreover, witnesses said he had never reconciled with the fact that Ildiko had left him and he had begun to stalk her. Shortly before her death, the woman had confided to friends that she feared for her life and was concerned that her ex-lover might seek revenge. Only in early 2024 was Stephen Bill finally found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. All appeals submitted by him and his team of lawyers were rejected.
The Summer Baldwin case, buried in suitcases. In the world of criminal investigations, when two or more crimes share similar characteristics, experts often link them as part of a series. It can take years to identify and apprehend serial criminals. Most criminals have experienced violence and abuse as children, and some have varying degrees of mental illness. Nevertheless, they are aware of their actions. To the outside world, these people often seem perfectly normal, so much so that those around them don't notice that they are facing a ruthless killer. Such was the case with Rosendo Rodriguez, an outwardly unassuming young man who served in the U.S. Marine Corps. Witnesses who knew him personally and testified at his trial described him as a friendly, responsible, and good-hearted man who wouldn't hurt a fly. However, it emerged that he had brutally taken the lives of 2 young women and disposed of their bodies in a particularly extravagant and unusual way. Looking ahead, I will say that this man was justly punished for his heinous deeds. But let's start from the beginning to understand this loud and complex case, learn about his victims, and dive into the childhood of the criminal to understand how he turned into a monster, a naked beauty in a suitcase. This chilling tale began on September 13, 2005, in the outskirts of Lubbock, Texas. A city utility worker performing routine duties at a local landfill noticed an unusual object amid the typical array of colorful trash, a large black suitcase that seemed oddly intact and bulky. Curiosity piqued. He opened the suitcase, hoping perhaps to find something valuable. To his horror, the first thing he saw upon unzipping it was a woman's manicured hand. Initially, he couldn't believe it was a real human body and not a doll or mannequin. On fully opening the suitcase, he discovered the naked body of a young woman, her knees drawn up to her chest, arms crossed around her neck. The worker immediately halted the garbage truck that had brought the grisly suitcase and called the police. The landfill was quickly cordoned off, and the truck and its contents were thoroughly examined. Finding any clues in a vast city dump was nearly impossible, but the investigators hoped to at least uncover hints about the woman's identity and how she ended up there in such a state. No identification or personal items were found in the suitcase. The only distinctive feature on the body was a small tattoo on the leg with the word "Summer." The medical examiners now faced the task of determining the cause of death, while forensic experts needed to identify the victim and track down her killer. An autopsy revealed multiple injuries inflicted while the woman was alive, including signs of sexual violence. However, the cause of death was positional asphyxiation. She was still alive when placed in the suitcase, but suffocated due to the confined space. By the time her body was found, she had been deceased for approximately a day. Fingerprint analysis uploaded to the national database in the United States identified the victim as 29-year-old Summer Lee Baldwin. Who was Summer Baldwin? Summer Baldwin, born in 1976 in Washington, was known for her sweet, kind, and open nature. She was a bright student with a vibrant personality and many friends. Dreaming of an acting career, Summer had high aspirations for her life. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in community college, but university studies were difficult for her. Friends invited her to Texas for a change of scenery and opportunities. Summer moved to Lubbock with the support of her parents, hoping to start her life with a clean slate. It is unknown when Summer's life spiraled, but she gradually became addicted to alcohol and illicit drugs without seeking help from her family. Over time, her addiction worsened, leading to job loss and connections with people with criminal records. Her acting dreams were dashed, and she eventually began working as an escort to support herself. Unaware of their daughter's problems, Summer's parents thought she was leading a successful life. They were devastated when the police informed them of her tragic death in September 2005.
The information they provided about Summer's friends and hangouts was limited. Notably, a few months before her death, Summer was a key witness in an important federal counterfeiting case. This suggested that her murder may have been a contract killing by a criminal gang, which drew the attention of the FBI and put the investigation under special scrutiny. The investigation and the first suspects. The first person called in for questioning by the police was Rebecca, best friend of the deceased Summer Baldwin. Rebecca shed light on Summer's occupation and mentioned several of her boyfriends, one of whom behaved aggressively, often raised his hand to her and persistently stalked her after their breakup. That man became the first suspect in the case. Summer's ex-boyfriend was detained and brought to the station the same day, but he categorically denied his involvement in the case. Moreover, he seemed genuinely surprised and upset by the news of her death. He had a solid alibi. The night before the tragedy, he had been involved in a drunken brawl in a bar and spent the night in a cell with another troublemaker. As a result, the police had to release the first and only suspect at the time. Another friend and, so to speak, colleague of the deceased provided the investigation with much more important information. According to a woman named Marjorie, she saw Summer the evening before the murder, and they even exchanged a few words. They met on September 11th in the parking lot of a convenience store. Marjorie recounted that a red van pulled up to the store, from which a young, fit man of Latino appearance got out and went inside, presumably to shop. In the meantime, Summer, seeing her friend, came out from the passenger side to greet her. She told Marjorie that he was her client, with whom she had been meeting for the second time in recent days. After the man came out of the store, he got behind the wheel, and Summer hurried back into the van. Marjorie then went about her business and didn't see which direction the van drove off, nor did she know where the couple planned to have their rendezvous. She added that she had never seen the man before and assumed he was not a local. The only description she could provide was that he had very short hair, like a military man, due to the darkness outside and her inability to see him clearly. What's wrong with the suitcase? The suitcase, which became a young woman's coffin, appeared quite odd. Externally, it was smeared with garbage and waste, yet it wasn't worn out, and its wheels looked new. Inside, all tags were in perfect condition, and the lining seemed as if the item was brand new. Moreover, even the plastic attachment for the price tag was intact, suggesting that the person who bought the suitcase hadn't removed it. It was established that suitcases of this brand were sold in dozens of stores throughout the city, but this particular large model was available only in 2 stores. Thanks to the perfectly preserved barcode, it was discovered that a pair of identical suitcases were sold the day before the grim discovery at a Walmart store in the same area of the city where the girl was last seen alive. The first purchase was made after noon, and the second around 2 in the morning, which was quite strange and suspicious. Police officers immediately went there and requested the store's surveillance camera footage. Upon reviewing the material, they found that the first suitcase was bought by an elderly couple. These people were not initially suspicious, but they were located, and they could present the suitcase and explained that they bought it for a vacation trip. The second suitcase, however, was bought by a young man of Latino appearance, athletic build, and with very short hair, like a military man's. Suspicions arose that this was the person mentioned by the witness who saw him in the company of the deceased girl in the parking lot of the supermarket. Moreover, the man also bought a pair of disposable gloves at the checkout. Further information was provided by the external surveillance cameras installed in the store's parking lot. They showed the man exiting with the suitcase in hand and loading it into a red van. Too many coincidences led the police to believe they had found their man, and all that remained was to establish his identity, locate, and bring him in for questioning. Hunt for the stranger. The man was extremely cautious, using cash instead of a card to avoid leaving any personal data. However, he didn't account for the surveillance cameras in the parking lot, which captured his vehicle's license plate number perfectly. Police quickly identified the vehicle as a rental in the name of Rosendo Rodriguez, a U.S. Marine Corps reservist. Rodriguez had no criminal record and hadn't previously come to police attention. He was in Lubbock for a few days with his unit for training. Finding Rodriguez immediately was challenging as he wasn't at the hotel where his unit stayed. However, police had his details and discovered he had withdrawn a large sum of cash from an ATM at another hotel, likely the money used to pay for the suitcase and gloves. Rodriguez hadn't stayed at the hotel where he used the ATM. Instead, someone named Thomas Rodriguez, matching Rosendo's description, had checked in on September 11th. It turned out to be the same person using a different name for unknown reasons. Luck favored the investigation. The hotel room rented by Rodriguez, which he had already checked out of, hadn't been cleaned yet, yielding crucial evidence. There were brown stains and splatters on the carpet, bed, and walls that resembled dried blood. A tag from a new suitcase was found near the bed, and the trash contained used contraceptives and disposable gloves. Forensic analysis confirmed the dried blood in the room belonged to Summer, and DNA on the contraceptives and gloves matched both Summer and Rodriguez. There was no doubt they had found the murderer, but by then, Rodriguez had already left the city. However, with all necessary information, tracking him down was straightforward. Rosendo Rodriguez III was born on March 26, 1980, in Wichita Falls, Texas, into a poor family of Mexican immigrants. Reports suggest that he experienced violence and harsh treatment in his early childhood. His father, described as domineering and aggressive, struggled with alcoholism, and frequently abused his wife and children. During his childhood, Rosendo also displayed aggression, often getting into fights at school. However, as he grew older, he learned to control his anger. After high school, he attended Texas Tech University and moved away from his parents. Living independently, he worked various jobs, including at a pizzeria, as a courier, and as an office clerk, before deciding to serve in the U.S. Marine Corps. Colleagues in the military described Rodriguez as quiet, balanced, disciplined, and responsible. He was seen as a good friend, always ready to help, well-educated, and physically attractive, making him popular with women. Rodriguez was arrested on September 15th at his home in San Antonio. When police arrived, he was calm and seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation. During the search, a striped shirt and shorts were found, matching the outfit he wore when purchasing the suitcase caught on surveillance footage. Additionally, his laptop and mobile phone were seized, interrogations, and Rodriguez's version. For the first few weeks, Rosendo remained silent and denied involvement in Summer Baldwin's murder. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, so following his attorney's advice, he started giving statements with his version of events, which differed significantly from the scenario built by the forensic experts. Rodriguez began by explaining that he had accidentally booked a hotel separate from his fellow servicemen. He knew only the name of the hotel chain they were supposed to stay at, chose a hotel randomly, and only after checking in did he realize the rest were at a different location. He chose not to relocate as the military leadership indicated it wasn't necessary. He failed to explain why he registered under a different name. On the morning of September 10th, Rodriguez rented a van for convenience around the city. That evening, he claimed to have met Summer Baldwin by chance. According to him, he saw a blonde woman sitting on a bench by the road, covering her face with her hands as if she was crying. Intrigued and concerned, he stopped to check if she was okay and needed help. They struck up a conversation. She calmed down, and then they went to his hotel room where they talked and drank a bit, but did not become intimate. The next morning, Rosendo drove her home, but they agreed to meet in the evening. He picked her up at the same place around 9 p.m. and went to a supermarket, where Summer saw her friend Marjorie. They then returned to the hotel, where Rodriguez said there was consensual intimacy between them. Afterward, however, Rodriguez said Summer became aggressive and demanded money, which surprised him because he did not realize he was with a call girl. When he refused, she allegedly pulled a knife out of her purse and began threatening him. He disarmed her and punched her in the face, causing her nose to bleed. Rodriguez claims he did not intend to harm her, but acted in self-defense. Moments later, Summer collapsed on the bed and convulsed, foaming at the mouth. He stated that he tried to help her, but refrained from mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because of the blood and foam on her face. After a minute, she stopped breathing. Realizing she was dead, he panicked. He went to the nearest store, bought a suitcase and gloves, returned to the hotel, put her body in the suitcase, and threw it in the dumpster, knowing that it would be taken to the landfill the next morning. He then checked out of the hotel, returned the rental car, and drove home to San Antonio as if nothing had happened. Inconsistencies in the suspect's story. Investigators immediately realized that Rosendo Rodriguez was lying because there were numerous inconsistencies in his story. For example, Marjorie, who met Summer in the parking lot the night of the crime, claimed that Summer told her explicitly that the man was a client of hers with whom they had previously had a paid meeting. Rodriguez claims that everything between them was consensual, but evidence on Summer's body indicates that she was taken advantage of. It is likely that their first night was indeed consensual, which is why Summer agreed to meet him again. Moreover, Rodriguez claimed that he only hit Summer in the face once to calm her down, but she died of a seizure. However, an autopsy found about 30 fresh bruises on Baldwin's head and body on the night of the crime, and several stab wounds. In addition, she was alive when he packed her in the suitcase, contradicting his claim that she was already dead. Another girl in a suitcase. During an investigation at Rodriguez's residence, police seized his laptop computer. A review of his search history revealed a disturbing pattern. In the 3 days prior to his arrest, Rodriguez had been actively searching for information about a girl named Summer, paying attention to whether there was an ongoing search for her and whether her body had been found in a landfill. Interestingly, Rodriguez also frequently searched for Joanna Catherine Rogers, a 16-year-old girl from Lubbock who went missing a year and a half ago. When authorities offered Rodriguez a plea bargain in exchange for information about Joanna's fate, a deal that included a reduced sentence and avoided the death penalty, he reluctantly accepted and told his story. He met Joanna, a high school student in Lubbock, in late April 2004. After a few meetings, they went to his hotel room on May 4th. The situation turned tragic when, after an argument over money and threats of a lawsuit for rape, Rodriguez panicked and covered Joanna's mouth to silence her and inadvertently caused her death. In a desperate attempt to dispose of the body, Rodriguez put it in his own suitcase and threw it in a dumpster. This method replicates the disposal of Summer's body a year and a half later. Rodriguez initially confessed to these actions, but later recanted his testimony, claiming coercion. Realizing the need to find Joanna's body to strengthen the case, police undertook a massive search of the city dump. More than a year later, they miraculously found a suitcase containing Joanna's remains. Despite severe decomposition, DNA testing confirmed the identity of the remains. This evidence allowed authorities to charge Rodriguez as a serial offender, committing similar heinous crimes with a consistent modus operandi. Trial, verdict, and execution. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the gravity of his crimes, defendant Rosendo Rodriguez hoped to avoid the death penalty until the last moment, expecting a life sentence with the possibility of parole. However, the court decided otherwise.
The decisive factor was the fact that Summer Baldwin was 3 months pregnant at the time of her tragic death. This aggravating factor was decisive, and the court found Rodriguez guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to death by lethal injection. Rodriguez and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, citing errors and misconduct by investigators, but all were rejected. While in prison awaiting execution, Rodriguez even maintained his own blog on criminal justice and policy issues. On March 27, 2018, nearly 10 years after being convicted of his heinous crimes, Rosendo Rodriguez was finally executed. This occurred the day after his 38th birthday. The death sentence was carried out in the Huntsville prison in Texas. This execution was the 4th in Texas and the 7th in the United States for the year 2018.